I cared for her for 5 years, but my mother's sobs could be heard from the audience as tears welled up in my husband's eyes. He's done nothing for all this time, yet he plays the good son so well. I'm the only one who knows the truth. You better realize this, John. I started, playing the audio evidence that would reveal my husband's true nature. My name is Sarah. I've been married to John for 7 years now. Currently, we live as a family of 3 with my bedridden mother-in-law. 5 years ago, her illness forced her into a bedridden lifestyle. My father-in-law had passed away before I got married, so there was no one else to care for her. At the time, John's work wasn't going well, and we were struggling to make ends meet. So he asked if we could live together with his mother, and she agreed. Feeling guilty about relying on her, I decided to take care of her while also working a part-time job. My mother-in-law seemed to feel guilty about being cared for. I continued, recounting how she often tried to reassure me. Sarah, that's enough. Please don't worry about me. I always encouraged her with a strong will, I recalled. When she said this with a troubled smile, I replied, what are you talking about? I'm indebted to you, mother-in-law. But it must be hard with both work and housework, plus taking care of me. I don't want to burden you anymore, Sarah, she insisted. It's not a burden at all. I want to be with you. That's why I'm doing this on my own accord. I reassured her. But you should have your own happiness. Being able to talk to you every day like this is my happiness, so don't worry about it. Tears welled up in mother-in-law's eyes as she whispered a small thank you. There's not much that I can do, yet she always expresses her gratitude like this. Ever since we got married, my mother-in-law has been very kind to me, so taking care of her is not a burden at all. In fact, it feels like my mission. While I do enjoy caring for her, there's one thing I'm not satisfied with in my current life. My husband, John. He's what you'd call a traditional type who thinks housework is a woman's job. He wasn't that bad when we got married, but since we started living with his parents, he's become increasingly selfish. He doesn't contribute much to the household expenses, but his entitlement is as high as Everest. For instance, when he comes home, he starts yelling if I don't greet him at the door. Hey Sarah, I'm home. Why aren't you greeting me? Hurry up, get my stuff. I frowned at my husband and voiced my complaints. Listen, John, I've told you before, I'm not your servant. You should do what you can on your own. Huh? What are you saying? Who do you think is making the money for this family? Yes, it's true that you're providing for us, but I'm also doing my part. I'm working part-time. Despite that, you speak to me like this. Shut up. Your earnings are just peanuts. You can't survive without me, so don't you dare defy me. And you? You can't even contribute properly to the living expenses. The only reason we can live in this house is undoubtedly thanks to your mother. At first, I would fight back, but my husband started threatening divorce every time we quarreled. Watch yourself, Sarah. Keep this up and we'll get a divorce, got it? Please, not so loud. Your mother is in the other room. Shut it. It's all because you're so insolent. Understand this. You'd be the one in trouble if we divorced. Do you get that? Just lower your voice and don't always talk about divorce like that. Yeah, right. You would have nowhere to go if we got divorced. Besides, there's no company out there willing to hire a scrub like you full-time, Sarah. Stop talking like that. Just shut up and listen to what I'm saying. You idiot. You're so slow. Honestly, I was more than ready to divorce my husband, but when I thought of my mother-in-law, I couldn't bring myself to go through with it. You can always talk to me if you're troubled, Sarah. You're my precious daughter, my mother-in-law would reassure me. She was always very kind to me, as if we were truly mother and daughter. Because of her, I wanted to take care of her properly until the end. I wanted to repay her for all the kindness she had shown me. That's why I endured the painful days with my husband in this house. I couldn't entrust my mother-in-law's care to a man like him. Then one day, as I was preparing dinner, I heard the usual shouting from the entrance. Hey Sarah, I'm home. Come out and greet me. I'm using the stove right now and can't leave it. What, are you kidding me? What kind of wife doesn't prioritize her husband? My husband, who had lost his patience, stormed into the living room. Hey, what are you thinking? I always tell you to greet me when I come home. Why don't you understand? As you can see, I was just frying something. I don't care. You should have timed it to be finished when I come home. You're useless. Well, you never tell me when you'll be home. I told you not to talk back. A useless and insolent wife is nothing but garbage. My mother-in-law, who had come out upon hearing the harsh words, spoke in a stern voice. John, that is no way to talk, is it? Oh, Mom, you're still alive. Sarah is working hard every day for this household for both of you and me. That's what a wife is supposed to do, right? She earns a little, is half-baked in housekeeping. She's basically social trash. Enough is enough. My usually quiet mother-in-law raised her voice on the spot. You wouldn't say what you want about me. Don't you dare slander Sarah. What, Mom? Are you on Sarah's side too? You two are colluding, huh? My mother-in-law, who usually remains silent, continued to speak. This time, John, one request. Ha! What is it? Just put me in a nursing home. I don't want to be a burden on Sarah anymore. Ha! A nursing home. Where do you think we have that kind of money? We still have your father's inheritance and my pension. I don't need a fancy place. At my mother-in-law's unexpected remark, I was at a loss for words. Mother-in-law, have you been considering this? Thinking about me? Tears welled up in my eyes at the thought of her kindness. However, it was completely lost on my husband. At the suggestion, he made a deeply disgusted face. Don't joke around. There's no way we're putting you in a nursing home. That's a waste of money. Please don't say that. Life would be easier in this house if I wasn't here. If we put you in a facility, the neighbors and my colleagues will start gossiping that I'm an ungrateful son, won't they? You don't need to worry about what people think. I still want to be a burden to you. Then shut up and do as you're told, old woman. I'm taking care of you, isn't that enough? John, you don't do anything. Huh? I let you live in this house and I make Sarah work too. Isn't that enough for you, ungrateful woman? Unable to bear my husband's words, I raised my voice. Are you talking about who's the ungrateful one here? This house originally belonged to your mother, didn't it? Are you talking back to me again? But that's true, isn't it? 5 years ago, when you were fired, we were in trouble, and didn't your mother-in-law gladly take us in? How can you say that? Shut up, both of you. And I'm not doing this reluctantly. I'm taking care of mother-in-law out of my own will. Stop making unilateral decisions. Despite my desperate plea, my husband just said, "That's true. Troublesome," and left the room. In the awkward silence, my mother-in-law kept apologizing and crying. It's not your fault, mother-in-law. The one at fault is John. Every day, I was frustrated by a reality that I could not control. A few days later, while I was cleaning the house, a man who claimed to be an acquaintance of my mother-in-law's came to visit. Mother-in-law looked surprised, but she wore a full smile. Oh, is that you, Jackson? You came to visit. Well, if I was asked to visit my senior Linda, I couldn't refuse, could I? I remember treating you a lot at work when we were younger, right? Yes, I'm grateful. So what's your will? Why did you call me today? Yes, actually, looking at me, mother-in-law said, sorry, could you step out for a bit? Assuming they had a lot to catch up on, I happily agreed, saying, sure, and went out to buy some sweets. This man Jackson apparently was a junior when mother-in-law was working. It had been a while since I saw mother-in-law looking so happy. When I thought it was time to come back, Jackson was just about to leave. Oh, excuse me, I'm about to make tea. No, that's fine. We finished our conversation, but thank you for always taking care of Linda. She's a benefactor to me, so it's reassuring to know that she has a daughter like you. He bowed his head to me and left. Since then, Jackson has been regularly visiting mother-in-law, and they always have a lively conversation. It was a few months later that my mother-in-law's condition worsened, and she had to be rushed to the hospital. When I urgently called my husband, he responded with disbelief. My mom's in danger. As if I care. You're there, you can handle it. But the doctor said her condition's unpredictable. Please, I need you. No way. Plus, I'm leaving for a business trip today. What now? Of all times, please try to cancel it. Are you stupid? There's no way I can do that. Handle it on your own and don't call me until I reach out first. With that, he hung up abruptly. Not knowing what to do, I slumped down in front of my mother-in-law's hospital room. He's going on a business trip while his mother is in this state? This is just too cruel. How am I supposed to tell my mother-in-law? Just as I was sinking into despair, Jackson appeared. Oh, Sarah, what's wrong? Jackson. Something happened, right? Let's go to your mother-in-law's room for now. Okay. When we entered the room, my mother-in-law looked at us and struggled to speak. Jackson, you're here. So, does that mean you did what I asked? Yeah, but are you sure about this? Of course. I have to clear things up before I go, don't I? I understand. Then my mother-in-law weakly took my hand. Sarah, there's something I want you to know. What is it? My son has been withdrawing money from my account for his pension and spending it on his mistress. An affair? He's a man who treated me like a maid. I had some idea from the start, but to think he was even taking money from his mother's pension. I asked Jackson to investigate the matter. I see, so that's why my mother-in-law called Jackson to the house. Jackson, please record what I'm about to say. It will be my last will. Understood, Linda. Jackson slowly took out a voice recorder. Once he finished recording everything, he placed it in my hand. How you use this recording is up to you, Sarah. Up to me? Yes, I'm the only one who can avenge my mother-in-law. I squeezed her frail hand back with strength. The next day, my mother-in-law passed away, leaving her final revenge in my hands. On the day of the funeral, 2 days later, my mother-in-law, who had always been popular, drew a large crowd. Seeing this, my husband made an inappropriate comment. Wow, I didn't expect so many people to come. It's a great opportunity to show off my skills as chief mourner. What are you talking about? You weren't even there when she died. Ignoring my reproach, he continued casually, I'll make everyone cry with my touching eulogy. My bosses from work are here too. If they're moved by how filial I am, it could boost my reputation and lead to a promotion. Just kidding. How can you act like this when your mother just passed away? Just think about it. Now that mom's gone, I'll get dad's inheritance, right? Man, I'm so lucky. Ignoring my trembling rage, my husband cheerfully went on to give the eulogy. After the formalities, he began talking about taking care of his mother. Then, with tears in his eyes, he said, I have devoted myself to caring for my mother for 5 years, but in vain. She has passed away. But I have no regrets. I am proud that I could support my mother until the end. At my husband's eulogy, sobs could be heard from the audience. Perhaps pleased with the reaction, my husband continued to speak indefinitely with a touch of drama as if he had always been a dutiful son. The attendees, oblivious, listened to his story with tears in their eyes. Thank you all for today, he concluded. With his closing words, I stood up. As the room began to stir, I stood before my husband and took out a voice recorder. What are you doing? Ignoring my husband's restraint, I raised my voice to the attendees. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, please listen to this recording. As I pressed the play button, my mother-in-law's voice flowed from the voice recorder, her voice at that time, recorded in the hospital. Thank you all for attending today. There's something I absolutely want you to hear, so I've left this voice message. My husband and even the attendees were stunned by the unexpected turn of events. I believe you've just heard my son's speech. Probably he was talking as if he had been a dutiful son. The recording continued in my mother-in-law's voice that knew my boastful husband well. She had a good grasp of his likely behavior as a parent. I increased the volume of the voice recorder so that everyone could hear. However, my son did not care for me. He just kept shouting at me and my daughter-in-law, Sarah. Of course, we have audio evidence of him verbally abusing Sarah and me. As my husband's face turned red, he shouted, What is this? Stop this. Ignoring him, I continued to play the recording. Besides, hi son, I was withdrawing my pension from my account without my permission. I'm giving it to another woman, not Sarah. One day, I noticed something odd about my son and had an old friend look into it, and this fact came to light. The attendees were all filled with anger, while my husband turned pale. Finally, my mother-in-law delivered a final blow to my husband from heaven. I have a request for everyone. Please do not give my inheritance to my son. You could donate it, destroy it, whatever. Anyway, I will not forgive my son. I need your help. With those words, the voice ceased. My husband was in a panic, shouting something, but no one was there to help him. On the contrary, all of the attendees were giving him cold stares. Looking down at my husband, I said coldly, Do you understand? This is the result of what you've been doing. You abandoned the care of your mother and were having an affair. You've learned a lot from this, haven't you? Wait, Sarah, I was wrong. So, you are not going to say something stupid like, help me, are you? Let me tell you, I will never forgive you. After tormenting your mother and ridiculing people, there's no one who's going to help you. Suffer in hell. In the midst of the attendees' cold stares, my husband collapsed onto the ground, pale-faced. After that, I divorced my husband. There was no reason for me to be with him now that my mother-in-law had passed away. I later heard that he had been fired from his job. His boss had been at the funeral, so it was a predictable outcome. I demanded alimony from my ex-husband for his mistress. Apparently, his mistress was furious about this and promptly dumped him. A few months later, my ex-husband was able to find a new job through Jackson's introduction, but that was also part of my mother-in-law's plan. My ex-husband was working at a company known to Jackson, and from his salary, he was paying me alimony. Thanks to this, the alimony is paid to me every month without fail. Meanwhile, I started living alone with the money my mother-in-law had left me. Jackson, who was worried about me, even introduced me to a full-time job. All of this was apparently in my mother-in-law's will. I can't thank my mother-in-law enough for everything she's done for me. I said a prayer in front of my mother-in-law's grave and thanked her in my heart. Thank you so much, mother-in-law. I swore to myself that I would cherish this life I was given thanks to my mother-in-law.
I had been running around all day, making sure everything was perfect for the charity event. The football team I managed was hosting, and it was crucial everything went smoothly. By the time the guests started pouring in, I was already exhausted but had to keep the smile plastered on. I was checking the auction items when I first saw him. John was hard to miss. He was handing out programs at the door, his smile genuine and reaching his eyes. I figured he was just another volunteer, but something about him caught my attention. Need a hand with those? His voice was warm as he approached me by the auction table. I looked up, a bit startled. "Oh, thanks, but I think I've got it under control," I said, stacking the last of the brochures. "Sure looks like it," he chuckled, glancing around at the well-organized venue. "John," he extended his hand, which I shook, feeling his firm grip. "Emily," I introduced myself, trying to ignore the little spark that shot through me at the contact. "So, Emily, you run this whole operation?" His eyebrows shot up, clearly impressed. "Yeah, I manage the team and organize these events. It's a lot, but I love it." John nodded, his eyes scanning the room before settling back on me. "Looks like you do a great job. It's nice seeing so much support for a good cause." The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about the event, the team, and somehow drifted into more personal territories like our favorite movies and books. It was refreshing to talk to someone who was genuinely interested in what I had to say. "So, you volunteer often?" I asked, sipping my drink as we leaned against a high table. "Whenever I can. My buddy dragged me here, but I'm glad he did." John's smile was infectious, and I found myself grinning back. "Dragged? Really, that's the story you're going with?" I teased, raising an eyebrow. He laughed, a sound that was hearty and sincere. "Okay, maybe not exactly dragged. I wanted to come. And I'm glad I did, meeting you is a bonus." As the night wore on, I realized I was enjoying myself more than I had at any previous event. It wasn't just the success of the evening, it was John. He was easy to talk to, didn't put on airs, and didn't shy away from showing his interest. His down-to-earth nature was a breath of fresh air in the usual snooty crowds I mingled with. "Hey, before this night ends, can I see you again?" John's question caught me a bit off guard, not by the content but by the earnestness in his voice. "I'd like that," I admitted, my usual guarded self taking a back seat. "Great, it's a date then," he said with a confident nod, his smile wide. As I watched him mingle with other guests, thanking them for their contributions, I couldn't help but feel like maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something special. The drive over to John's parents' place was quiet, too quiet. I kept fidgeting with the hem of my skirt, my stomach in knots. John noticed, of course, and reached over to give my hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's gonna be fine, Em. They're gonna love you," he said with a smile, but I could tell he was a bit nervous too. As we pulled into the driveway of a tidy suburban home, my anxiety ramped up. John's mom, Martha, and his sister, Karen, were already waiting at the door as we walked up. Their smiles were tight, almost forced. "John, and you must be Emily," Martha said, her voice sweet but her eyes scanning me like a hawk. She offered a cheek kiss that barely touched my cheek. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Smith, I managed to say, trying to sound confident. Please, call me Martha. And this is Karen. She gestured to a woman who looked a lot like John, but with sharper edges. Karen's smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she shook my hand. Heard a lot about you, Emily. John can't stop talking. The inside of the house was as neat as the exterior, every piece of furniture and decor perfectly in place. We sat down in the living room, and the small talk started, the kind that pricked at you under the surface. So, Emily, John tells us you manage a football team? That's an interesting choice for a career, Martha said, her tone dripping with something that sounded like disapproval. I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of her judgment. Yes, I love sports, and it's a fulfilling job. The team is like a family. A family of big, burly men, Karen chimed in, her words sharp. Must be tough, keeping them all in line. I laughed, a bit uneasy. They're not that hard to manage, really. We respect each other a lot. Dinner was served shortly after, and the atmosphere didn't get any lighter. Every question felt like a test, every answer I gave scrutinized. Martha passed the salad. I suppose in your line of work, you don't get much time for finer pursuits? Reading, art? I find time, I said, keeping my tone light. I love reading. And I do enjoy art when I can. Karen snorted softly. What's your favorite book then? I mentioned a recent bestseller, a thriller I'd actually enjoyed quite a bit. Ah, light reading, Karen dismissed it quickly. I prefer classics myself. More depth, you know? I nodded, feeling out of my depth. The meal continued with more of these little jabs, veiled in politeness, but sharp enough to sting. John tried to change the subject a few times, bringing up neutral topics like movies and vacation plans, but the tension hovered like a cloud over the table. After dinner, John and I helped clear the table, and he whispered, "You okay?" "Yeah, just didn't realize it would be an interrogation," I whispered back, trying to smile. We said our goodbyes soon after, Martha's farewell as cool as her welcome. "Lovely to meet you, Emily. We must do this again soon," she said, her smile tight. As John and I walked back to the car, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that the evening was over, and frustration that it hadn't gone as I'd hoped. Wedding planning was supposed to be fun, or so I thought. But every decision felt like walking through a minefield with John's mom and his sister having an opinion on everything. From the color of the napkins to the seating arrangements, nothing escaped their scrutiny. "Really, Emily, chartreuse for the bridesmaids? It's such a vibrant choice," Martha had said one afternoon, eyeing my color swatches like they were toxic waste. I tried to keep my cool, clenching my fists under the table. "John likes it. It's lively, don't you think?" Karen had snorted, flipping through a bridal magazine. "If you're aiming for lively, sure. Most would prefer classy, though." Their comments were like little jabs, constant and stinging. John did his best to back me up, but there were moments I saw him caught in the middle, trying to please everyone. As the big day drew closer, the remarks didn't let up. We were at the final tasting for the wedding menu when Martha brought up the guest list again. "So, Emily, you've really invited your entire team? All those men?" Her tone was as smooth as silk, but the implication was clear. "Yeah, they're a big part of my life," I replied, trying not to let her see she was getting to me. "They're looking forward to celebrating with us." Karen chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern. "Isn't that a bit inappropriate?" "I mean, it's your day, but you know, appearances and all." I bit back a sharper retort, settling for, "They're just friends, Karen. John knows them well." John jumped in then, his voice firm. "Emily's right. They're great guys. Let's focus on the food, huh? How's the chicken?" He was trying, I'd give him that. The wedding day itself was a blur of smiles, dances, and thankfully, minimal drama. Martha managed to keep her comments to a minimum, and Karen was too busy judging the flower arrangements to stir up much trouble. At the reception, though, after a few glasses of champagne, Karen found me alone by the bar. "Emily, just a heads up, Mom and I will be keeping an eye on things, after the wedding." Her words slurred slightly, but her sharp gaze told me she was sober enough to mean what she said. I frowned, turning to face her fully. "What's that supposed to mean, Karen?" "Just that, we care about John. A lot. We're here to protect him, from whatever might come." She patted my hand in a patronizing way that made my skin crawl. I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and decided to let it go for the night. For John's sake, I plastered on a smile and rejoined the party. The rest of the evening went off without a hitch, and John and I slipped away, finally married and ready to start our life together. As we drove off to our honeymoon, his hand in mine, I felt a mix of joy and apprehension. The wedding was over, but something told me the real challenges were just beginning. The news hit like a wave when I found out I was pregnant. Overjoyed, I couldn't wait to tell John. We'd been talking about starting a family, and this felt like the perfect next chapter for us. John's reaction was everything I hoped for. His eyes lit up, and he lifted me off the ground in a bear hug right in the middle of our kitchen. "We're gonna have a baby," he exclaimed, laughter and tears mixing on his face. It was a moment of pure happiness, one I wanted to bottle up and keep forever. But then came the hard part, telling his family. Given the cold shoulder I'd gotten so far, I was nervous. We decided to break the news at a family dinner that Sunday. As we drove over, John squeezed my hand, trying to be reassuring. "Whatever happens, we're in this together, right?" he said, glancing over at me with a smile. "Right," I nodded, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. Dinner was already tense when we arrived. Martha was her usual self, controlling the conversation, while Karen seemed on edge, barely acknowledging my presence. When dessert was served, John decided it was now or never. "So, we have some news," he began, his voice steady but filled with excitement. Martha and Karen turned their full attention to us, forks paused midair. "We're expecting a baby," I said, managing a smile despite the anxiety. Martha's reaction was hard to read at first. She just sat there, blinking, before forcing a smile. "Well, that's wonderful news," she said, her voice a bit too high-pitched. Karen, on the other hand, didn't bother hiding her feelings. "A baby, huh? You sure it's John's?" Her words cut through the air, sharp and cold. John's face turned red, and he slammed his hand on the table. "Karen, what the hell?" I felt a chill run down my spine, but I forced myself to speak. "Yes, I'm sure." "Why would you even say that?" Karen shrugged, looking from me to John with a smirk. "Well, you work with a lot of men, Emily. It's a fair question." "That's out of line, Karen. Totally out of line," John shot back, his tone harsh. Martha intervened then, her voice soothing but with an undercurrent of steel. Now, let's not jump to conclusions. We're just surprised, that's all. Right, Karen?" Karen muttered something under her breath and pushed her chair back. "I need some air," she announced, before stalking off. The rest of the evening went downhill. We left soon after Karen's exit, the car ride home filled with silence and unsaid words. I could tell John was furious and embarrassed, and I didn't know how to comfort him without stirring up more anger. "John, I'm sorry about that," I finally said as we neared our house. "It's not your fault, Em. It's Karen. She's out of line. We'll handle it," he replied, his grip on the steering wheel tight. As we pulled into our driveway, I couldn't shake off Karen's words or the look in her eye. It was clear she was brewing up a storm, and I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. Her question about the baby's paternity was more than just a jab, it was a declaration of war. The weeks following the dinner were a mixed bag. Work kept me busy, and my pregnancy was progressing well, but the tension with John's family, especially Karen, was always lurking in the background. One particularly grueling day at the office, I was wrapping up late. Most of my team had already headed out, and I was looking forward to getting home and putting my feet up. That's when Mike, one of my coaches, popped his head back in the door. "Hey, Emily, you heading out soon? I can give you a lift if you need, my route's past your place today." I hesitated for a moment, aware of Karen's insinuations, but then reality kicked in. It was just a ride. "Sure, thanks, Mike. I'm just about done here." As we walked to his car, I was grateful for the company. Mike was always easy to talk to, and I needed to unwind after a long day. We chatted about the usual, team stuff, upcoming games, nothing personal. When he dropped me off, I thanked him and thought nothing more of it. That evening, John came home looking stormier than I'd seen him in a long time. He stormed into the kitchen, where I was starting on dinner, and slammed his keys on the counter. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice tight. I turned off the stove, my heart sinking. "What's wrong, John?" He pulled out his phone, showing me a video. It was me, getting into Mike's car. "Karen sent me this. She's making claims, about you and Mike. She's saying..." I felt sick. The video was harmless, but with Karen's spin, I could imagine what she was suggesting. "John, it's nothing. He just gave me a ride home because it was on his way." John ran his hands through his hair, clearly trying to calm himself. I know. It's just, her constant digging and poking. It's just hard, you know? Having my sister turn against my wife like this." The next day, things took a turn for the worse. Karen had escalated her campaign against me by calling our office anonymously, spreading rumors about my inappropriate relationships with the team. My boss pulled me aside, concerned. "Emily, you know I don't usually pay attention to gossip, but these calls, they're quite specific. Is everything all right?" I reassured him, angry and embarrassed, that Karen's lies had reached my workplace. "Everything's fine, really. Just some family drama spilling over. I'm sorry it's gotten this far." He nodded, understanding but clearly uncomfortable. "All right, just handle it, okay? We can't have this affecting the team." After Karen's anonymous calls, the atmosphere at work changed. It wasn't just the whispers, it was the looks. People I'd worked with for years, who joked around and shared coffee breaks with me, now hesitated, their eyes flicking away too quickly when I caught them staring. I walked into the locker room one day to grab some files when I overheard a couple of the newer team members whispering. "Just weird, isn't it? Wonder if it's true what they say about her," one of them muttered, not noticing my approach. I cleared my throat, and they both spun around, their faces going red. "If you have something to ask me, do it to my face. Not behind my back," I said, my voice colder than I intended. The taller one, a rookie named Tom, stuttered out an apology. "Sorry, Emily. It's just the rumors and all." "What, that I'm having affairs with half the team?" I snatched the files I came for, slamming the cabinet a little harder than necessary. "It's crap, and you do well to remember that." I left them standing there, probably more scared of me now than of any tabloid trash they heard. This was what Karen wanted, to make me doubt myself, to isolate me. I wasn't going to let her win. Back in my office, I tried to focus on the game strategies for the upcoming weekend. But my phone buzzed nonstop, texts from John asking if I was okay, calls from unknown numbers that I started ignoring. The weight of the situation was suffocating. Later, Mike knocked and came in, closing the door softly behind him. He looked serious, which was a departure from his usual easygoing self. "Emily, you all right? This talk going around, it's garbage, you know that, right?" His concern was genuine, and for a second, I felt my composure waver. "I know, Mike. Thanks," I managed, mustering a weak smile. "It's just hard, you know? To be questioned like this, about my professional conduct, because of some family feud." Mike nodded, leaning against the desk. "People talk, but they'll see it for what it is eventually. You've built up too much goodwill here for this to stick." I appreciated his words, and after he left, I felt a little better. Maybe not all was lost. Maybe the team would see through the nonsense after all. but the day wasn't over yet. As I was leaving, one of the administrative staff, Sarah, caught up with me at my car. She looked nervous, clutching a bunch of papers to her chest. "Emily, I didn't know who else to tell. There's been more calls. Not just to the office, but to some of the sponsors." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What exactly did they say, Sarah?" She shuffled the papers, pulling out a couple with scribbled notes. "Mostly insinuations. That you're not representing the team well, that your personal life might be a risk to our reputation. It's nonsense, but some of the sponsors are getting antsy." I took the papers from her, my hands shaking slightly. "Thanks for telling me, Sarah. I'll handle it." Driving home, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. How could I fight this? Karen's venom was spreading, poisoning everything I cared about. We decided to host a big celebration for the birth of our son, inviting both families to share in our joy. It was supposed to be a day of laughter and love, a chance to bring everyone closer and perhaps mend some fences. The house was filled with the sound of cheerful chatter and the sweet aroma of baked goods. As the party was in full swing, Karen arrived, her expression unreadable. She held an envelope in her hand, which she clutched a little too tightly. The mood shifted when she walked straight up to me, handing me the envelope with a tight smile. "Happy holidays, Emily," Karen said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness as she slid the envelope across the table toward me. "What's this?" I asked, not touching the envelope, feeling John's grip tighten. "A little gift. For peace of mind," Karen replied, her eyes glinting with malice. I glanced at John, who nodded slightly, and I steeled myself before opening the envelope. Inside was a paternity test voucher. My heart sank, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. "You serious right now, Karen?" John's voice was low, dangerous. "Why not prove it, Emily? If you're so sure," Karen taunted, leaning back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips. I looked around the table at the shocked faces of the family. Then, something in me snapped. I was done being the victim in Karen's twisted little game. "You want a test, Karen? Fine. Let's do it. Let's clear the air once and for all," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. John was staring at Karen, his expression hard. "And when it shows that I'm the father, Karen, I want you to stop this." "Stop all your crap." Karen shrugged, looking around at the family members who were whispering among themselves. "Sure, when it shows John as the father." The next week was a whirlwind of doctor's appointments and waiting. When the results came back, John and I opened them together. No surprise, John was indeed the father. We called another family meeting, this time at our home. Karen and Martha arrived, looking slightly apprehensive. I handed them the test results without a word. Karen opened the envelope and read the results. The color drained from her face as she realized what it meant. Martha read over her shoulder, her expression crumbling into one of embarrassment. John took a deep breath before he spoke, his disappointment palpable. "This needs to stop, Karen. Mom, I can't believe you supported this. We're supposed to be family." The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with unspoken regrets. Martha looked at me, then at John, and finally at the floor. "I'm sorry, Emily. We were wrong." Karen was silent, her usual bravado gone. She muttered a low apology before avoiding my gaze. As they left, the relief was palpable. Although the air had cleared somewhat, the wounds were deep. It would take time to heal, if at all. But as John and I looked at our son, sleeping peacefully in his crib, we knew we'd weather any storm for him. After the paternity test fiasco settled, I couldn't shake off a lingering sense of injustice. Despite proving Karen wrong, the sting of her accusation still burned bright. The whole ordeal had sparked a flame of revenge in me that I hadn't known I possessed. Karen's birthday was just around the corner, and an idea began to form in my mind, a plan to give her a taste of her own medicine. The day of Karen's birthday arrived, and the family gathered at John's parents' house for the celebration. Everyone was in high spirits, chattering and laughing, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. I had managed to keep my plan a secret, even from John, who I knew would disapprove of any kind of retaliation. As Karen opened her gifts, laughing and thanking everyone, I felt my heart pound in my chest. It was now or never. I approached her with a serene smile, the same DNA test certificate in hand that she had so callously gifted me months ago. "Happy birthday, Karen," I said, my voice calm as I handed her the envelope. "I thought you might appreciate this little gift, just as I did." Karen's face dropped as she took the envelope, confusion turning to apprehension. "What's this?" she asked, her voice a tremble. "A paternity test," I replied coolly. "After all, if you have nothing to hide, there's no harm, right?" The room fell silent. Everyone's eyes were on Karen, then on me. Martha looked from me to her daughter, clearly shocked. Karen hesitated, her face pale, then laughed nervously. "You're joking, right, Emily?" "No joke, Karen. Fair is fair," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. Under the weight of the family's expectant looks, Karen finally agreed. The test was done the following week, and we all awaited the results. When they came back, they revealed the shocking truth: Paul was not the father of Karen's children. The news broke during another family gathering, and chaos ensued. "How could you, Karen?" Martha's voice was filled with disbelief and anger. Paul, silent until then, stood up, his face hard with betrayal. "Who is he, Karen? Who?" Before Karen could respond, I played my final card. I pulled out my phone and showed them a video of Karen kissing an unknown man passionately at the stadium, a man who was later identified as Paul's best friend. "It's not what it looks like," Karen yelled, desperation creeping into her voice as she turned to face the family, who watched in stunned silence. "Emily set this up. She's trying to ruin me." "I did nothing but uncover the truth, Karen. The same truth you were so keen to find in my life," I said, my voice steady, despite the pounding of my heart. I explained that I had hired a private investigator after her relentless accusations. What he found was years of deceit on Karen's part. The revelation shattered the family. Accusations flew, tears were shed, and in the end, Paul and Karen's marriage crumbled under the weight of her infidelities. Karen tried to blame me for everything, but the evidence was irrefutable. In the aftermath, John and I decided it was best to distance ourselves from the drama. We focused on our own family, our little boy who was growing up so fast. Occasionally, we would hear snippets of Karen's tumultuous life, but we chose to stay out of it. Instead, we treasured every moment with our son, building a world around him filled with love and devoid of chaos. Sitting on our porch one evening, John wrapped his arm around me, a soft sigh escaping him. "You know, in the end, I think we did the right thing. For us, for him." I nodded, leaning into his embrace. "We did, John. We really did. No matter what came our way, we faced it together. That's what family does." As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the horizon, I felt a profound sense of contentment. We had faced challenges, but we had faced them together, and that made all the difference. Our future, bright and promising, was all that mattered now. My life's pretty standard for a young teacher, really. I'm Maya, and after grinding away at a teacher training college, I finally landed a gig at one of the best schools around. My plans? Teach, maybe write a bit on the side, and start a family with the right guy, whenever he decided to show up. That right guy thing happened faster than I expected, courtesy of my college buddy, Jess. "Maya, you have to meet Tom," Jess had insisted over coffee one windy Saturday afternoon. "He's looking for something real, and you too." "I dunno, I just have a feeling about this." Tom and I met at a local dive bar that evening. He was easy to spot, a head taller than most and with a laugh that filled up the room. I was nervous, fixing my hair like 100 times, but when he smiled, all that anxiety melted. "Hey, you must be Maya. Jess hasn't stopped talking about you. No pressure, right?" Tom joked, pulling out a chair for me. Yeah, no pressure at all, I laughed, settling down. Just deciding the course of my future in one evening. We hit it off instantly. Tom was in finance, a bit dry for my taste, but he made it sound like an adventure every time he talked about his day. He loved hiking, hated sushi, and had a soft spot for cheesy 80s movies. 2 years later, we were setting up our own little home. The wedding was nothing fancy, just close friends and family in a small garden ceremony. It was perfect for us. Tom's mom, Elaine, seemed nice enough, always with a polite smile and ready with a helping hand. We were off to a good start, or so I thought. Living together was a breeze at first. Tom was supportive, and we backed each other up, no matter what. Then the pressure started, subtly at first, but then all the damn time. Maya, when are you two giving me a grandkid? You know, Tom's my only shot at this. Elaine would drop casually into conversation every time she visited. It was like a broken record, each time more pressing than the last. I tried to play it cool, keep the peace. We're working on it, Elaine. These things take time, I'd say, forcing a smile while chopping veggies or setting the table. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Tom turned to me, his expression softening. Hey, sorry about Mom. She's just eager. We're okay, aren't we? Yeah, we're okay, I assured him, though part of me wondered just how long we could keep batting away the pressure before it started to crack something inside us. Living with the constant pressure to start a family was like walking on eggshells that kept stacking higher. Elaine's reminders were relentless, and with each visit, her patience seemed to wear thinner, like sandpaper against my already frayed nerves. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and Tom and I were enjoying a rare day off together. We were in the middle of a lazy breakfast when Elaine's car pulled up. Before she even stepped in, I knew we were in for another round of her grandkid campaign. Morning, you two. I was just at Linda's grandkid's christening. Adorable little thing. So, any news on my future grandchild? Elaine breezed into the kitchen like a whirlwind of expectation. Tom choked on his coffee, coughing a polite morning, Mom. I plastered a smile on my face, bracing myself. Hi, Elaine. We're just enjoying our breakfast. Want some coffee? I offered, trying to divert the conversation. No, I'm fine. Just here for a quick chat. Maya, you're not getting any younger. You know, it's all about timing. You need to be more proactive. Maybe see a doctor, or try those fertility treatments I was reading about, Elaine suggested, her voice a mix of faux concern and barely concealed urgency. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. We are perfectly capable of handling it, Elaine. And we will see a doctor if we think it's necessary, not because we're on a deadline, I snapped, a little louder than intended. Tom's hand found mine under the table, a silent plea for calm. Mom, really, it's our life. We'll take care of it. Let's not ruin a nice morning, he said, his tone firm yet respectful. Elaine sighed, a theatrical display of her frustration. I'm just saying, I want to see my grandkids while I'm still able to enjoy them. Is that too much to ask? There's more to our lives than just making babies, Elaine. We have careers, our own plans. I started, but Tom squeezed my hand, a gentle warning to tread lightly. I know. But remember, family is everything, Elaine retorted, her words sharp as she grabbed her purse. I'll leave you to your plans then. Just think about what I said, okay? After she left, the tension lingered like a bad odor. Tom and I spent the rest of the morning in silence, each lost in our thoughts. It was clear Elaine's visits were becoming a battleground, and we were always on the defense. That evening, we decided to take a walk, needing to clear the air. She's my mom and I love her, but I can't stand how she pushes us. It's like she's ticking boxes off some life checklist, Tom vented as we strolled through the park. I get it, she's excited, but it feels like she's more worried about being a grandma than our happiness or health, I replied, frustration simmering. It's like we're not real to her unless we produce a grandchild. We need to set some boundaries, Maya. Next time she starts up, we need to be clear, firm, but clear. Tom said, his hand tightening around mine. As we headed back home, the weight of our situation settled in my stomach like a stone. Setting boundaries with Elaine was going to be tough, but necessary. I wasn't just fighting for our peace, I was fighting for our future, whatever it might hold. Finally, after all the trials and tense dinners, our biggest wish came true. I was pregnant. Tom and I were over the moon, floating on a kind of happy haze that felt almost unreal. But with our good news came the revival of Elaine's overbearing enthusiasm, dialed up to a whole new level. We had just started fixing up what would be the baby's room, painting the walls a gentle, calming color, and assembling a crib that took more patience than I thought I had. It was during one of those DIY afternoons that Elaine showed up, unannounced as usual, wearing a bright pink t-shirt that screamed future grandmother in bold, impossible to miss letters. "Look at this, isn't it cute?" Elaine beamed, stretching the fabric out for us to see. "Got it custom made." "Elaine, could you maybe not announce it to everyone yet? We're still early in the process, and, just trying to be cautious." I tried to sound as gentle as possible, hoping to temper her excitement without sparking an argument. "Oh, honey, when you've got news this good, you shout it from the rooftops. Everyone's thrilled for us." Elaine's voice rose with each word, her excitement bubbling over like a pot left too long on the stove. The next few weeks were a blur of Elaine's constant check-ins. She was always calling or dropping by, armed with old wives' tales about pregnancy do's and don'ts, making sure I ate this and avoided that, fussing over my schedule and sleep. It was suffocating. "Elaine, I appreciate your help, really, but you hovering like this is stressing me out," I finally snapped one evening after she lectured me on the importance of prenatal yoga for the umpteenth time. The pressure didn't let up, though, and neither did my schedule. Balancing teaching with pregnancy wasn't easy, but I was determined to keep things as normal as possible. That is, until one day at school, halfway through explaining a math problem to my fourth graders, I felt a sharp pain that cut my sentence short. The room spun, the chalk slipped from my hand, and then darkness. I woke up in the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic flooding my senses, before my eyes even opened. Tom was there, his face pale and drawn, holding my hand like it was a lifeline. "The doctors, they had to do a surgery," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was serious, Maya. You almost didn't, we lost the baby." The words hit like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. Tears streamed down my face, uncontrollable, bitter. I was alive, but at what cost? The doctor came in, his face somber as he adjusted his glasses. "Maya, I'm afraid the complications were severe. You won't be able to have children in the future." This was a very rare and unfortunate situation. The room felt colder, the walls seemed to close in. I lay there in the hospital bed, the weight of this new reality settling heavily on my chest. Tom squeezed my hand, his presence a small comfort in the vast ocean of my grief. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Elaine stormed into my hospital room like a whirlwind of misplaced anger and desperation. I heard what happened. "So, when are you trying again? We need to start planning," she blurted out the moment she entered, barely even acknowledging my state. I was still hooked to a drip, the dull throbbing in my abdomen a constant reminder of what I'd lost. "Elaine, I can't have children anymore." The surgery, my voice broke, the reality hitting me again like a cold wave. "What do you mean you can't? That's nonsense." Elaine's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. She stormed out of the room, presumably to find a doctor who would contradict the irreversible truth. Tom held my hand, his eyes filled with silent apologies for his mother's harshness. It wasn't long before Elaine returned, her fury now fueled by the confirmation of my condition. "They said what? This is absurd. You've taken away my chance to be a grandmother." She was yelling so loud that a nurse peeked inside, her eyes wide with concern. "Mom, please," Tom interjected. "This isn't helping. Maya needs rest." "Rest? What she needs is to think about her family, about us. This is selfish." Elaine's words were like daggers, each one slicing through the little composure I had left. I'm not choosing this, Elaine. Why can't you understand? I almost died, I said, my voice a mixture of pain and frustration. Elaine's eyes narrowed. If you were more careful, this wouldn't have happened. You've always been too career-focused. Maybe that's why. Enough. Tom's voice boomed across the room. Mom, leave. Now. We'll talk when you're ready to be reasonable. But she wasn't done. Turning to me, her voice venomous, she hissed, "You're not worthy of my son. You can't give him what he needs. You're not a real woman." Her words stung, burning into my memory. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, the saltiness mingling with the bitterness of her judgment. Tom practically dragged her out, her protests still audible down the hallway. Recovery was slow. When I finally returned home, the emptiness was overwhelming. I attempted to go back to teaching, to find solace in the routine and the laughter of children, but each joyful shriek was a reminder of what I'd lost. Seeing a psychologist helped, somewhat. You need to grieve, Maya, not just for your child, but for the part of your life that is now behind you, Dr. Peterson told me in one of our sessions. Her words, meant to heal, somehow also underscored the finality of my loss. One day, amidst a particularly difficult week, I made a decision. I can't teach right now, I confessed to Tom over a quiet dinner. I see them, and I see what I lost. I'm thinking of the library. It's peaceful, quiet. So, I took a position at the local library, leaving the bustling corridors of the school for the muted aisles lined with literature and quiet patrons. It was a place where my heart could start to mend, away from the prying eyes and the heavy expectations. Even after the shift to the quiet life of the library, Elaine's shadow loomed over us, her persistence on the topic of grandchildren unyielding. Her approach became more invasive, her accusations more pointed as the days turned into months. It was my birthday, a day I hoped would be filled with light-hearted moments and a break from the relentless pressure. As I was about to cut the cake, Elaine cornered me in the kitchen, her voice a hissing whisper. "When are you going to fix this, Maya? You need to give Tom children," she spat, her words stinging with venom. I froze, the knife in my hand trembling slightly. "Elaine, Tom and I have been thinking about adoption. It's a beautiful way to form a family," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Adoption? Over my dead body?" Elaine exploded, her face contorted with disgust. "I won't have you bring some stranger's child into our family. Who knows what kind of sick, twisted genes they have? No grandchild of mine will come from someone who couldn't even keep them." Her outburst echoed through the kitchen, and a hushed silence fell over the nearby living room. I felt the eyes of everyone on us, their presence a heavy blanket. "That's enough, Elaine," I snapped, the knife clattering to the countertop as I faced her squarely. "You don't get to decide how Tom and I build our family. This is our life, our choice." Elaine's eyes narrowed, and with a huff, she stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her with a force that made the windows rattle. The room remained silent, the joy of the day sucked out with her departure. The seed of discord Elaine planted grew rapidly. The whispers started subtly at first, a nudge here, a look there, suggesting I had been reckless during my pregnancy. The rumors morphed into malicious gossip that I had been drinking and behaving indecently, which supposedly led to my miscarriage. Fury built up in me like a storm. One evening, after overhearing a particularly nasty version of the rumor from a so-called friend, I confronted Elaine over the phone. "Elaine, this has to stop now. Spreading lies about me is not only hurtful, it's slander. And I won't tolerate it anymore. If I hear one more rumor, I'm going to the police, and I will sue you for libel," I threatened, my voice cold and hard. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a moment of silence that felt like the calm before a storm. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and devoid of its usual fire. "You wouldn't dare. Try me, Elaine. I'm done playing nice." After that call, the rumors stopped as suddenly as they had started. But the damage was done. The relationship was strained, the family gatherings now marked by a chilly formality that even the warmest smiles couldn't thaw. Life seemed to have returned to normal, but everything has changed thanks to some perverted sense of humor. One morning, I found the first of many electronic postcards in my inbox. The image showed a smiling family, two parents with children playing around them, the picture of happiness. Below it, in cruel, stark letters, was written, "You will never be a mother." My heart sank, and a shiver ran down my spine. Who would send something so hateful? As if that wasn't enough, the physical manifestations of this hatred soon followed. One afternoon, upon returning from work, I found a box on our porch. Inside, grotesquely smeared with ketchup, were dolls. Attached was a note that twisted the knife deeper. "This is your fault. You are to blame for losing your child." I was horrified. Each new message, each package, felt like a blow to my already fragile state. Tears were my constant companions as I tried to grapple with the cruelty of these attacks. "Tom, look at this," I said one evening, handing him another vile package. My hands were shaking, my voice barely a whisper. "It's too much. I can't take it anymore." Tom was quick to act. "The neighbor, Mr. Jennings, he's got cameras all over his place. Maybe he caught something on video." We approached Mr. Jennings the next day, who was more than willing to help. He played back the recordings, and there, in clear, undeniable footage, was Elaine. The sight of her, stealthily placing those ghastly parcels at our door, was both a relief and a fresh hell. "Can't believe Mom would go this far," Tom muttered, disgust written all over his face. Armed with the evidence, we confronted Elaine at her house. The video was paused on the screen, her image frozen in the act of hatred. "Look at this, Mom. How could you?" Tom's voice was icy, his usual warmth gone. He pushed the laptop towards her, the betrayal in his voice echoing around the room. Elaine glanced at the screen, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, without a hint of remorse, she shrugged. "She's spoiled goods, Tom. An inferior woman who can't carry on the family line. I did what I had to do, for you, for the family's sake." Tom stepped in front of me, his posture protective. "If you can't accept Maya, then you can't be a part of our lives. This is your last chance, Mom. Apologize, or we're done." Elaine's face hardened, her eyes cold. "I'm only doing this for you, Tom. She's taking you away from what you deserve." The ride home was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. I was reeling, the weight of Elaine's betrayal heavy on my shoulders. Tom was seething, the ties with his mother stretched to their breaking point. Tom had been unusually quiet lately, his usual cheer dimmed by the strained silence between him and his mother. It was clear he missed her, despite everything. So, when the Christmas invitation from Elaine came, I agreed for his sake, hoping against hope for some sort of reconciliation. We arrived to a house bustling with relatives and friends, the air thick with the scent of pine and mulled wine. Elaine greeted us with a tight smile, her eyes darting nervously. I took a deep breath, clinging to Tom's arm as we mingled among the guests. The evening progressed smoothly at first, laughter and chatter filling the room. Then, midway through, Tom's ex-fiancée, Sarah, appeared. The room tensed as Elaine ushered her in. "As you all know, Maya here can't have children. So, I think it's time Tom reconsidered his options. Sarah is more than willing to take her place and give me the grandchildren I deserve," Elaine announced, her voice ringing clear and cruel. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my ears. Tom's voice, low and furious, broke the silence. "Mom, what are you talking about? I didn't agree to any of this." I couldn't hold it in any longer. "How could you?" My eyes scanned the crowd, landing on each face as I continued. "Elaine has been tormenting me. Sending me hateful messages, leaving disturbing packages at our door." I pulled out my phone, showing the video from Mr. Jennings' camera. The footage played, revealing Elaine's vile actions for all to see. Murmurs of shock and disgust rippled through the room. Sarah, looking equally horrified, stepped forward. "I had no idea about any of this. Elaine just invited me here under the guise of catching up." I'm actually engaged to someone else, and I'm not looking to disrupt that. She turned to me, her expression apologetic. Maya, I'm so sorry. I had no part in this plan. I never wanted children, which is why Tom and I split. The room was now a cauldron of whispers and stunned faces. Elaine's friends and relatives slowly started to leave, their expressions ranging from embarrassed to outraged. It was clear where their sympathies lay. Elaine, now pale and flustered, tried to salvage her dignity. But I was just trying to ensure my son had a proper family. Tom's voice was cold, final. By destroying the family you already had? I don't consider you my mother anymore. We're done, Elaine. Months had passed since that disastrous Christmas, and life had started to settle into a new, peaceful rhythm. Tom and I had been busy with the adoption process, our hearts and minds focused on the child who would soon become part of our family. It was a time of hope and healing, but it wasn't long before Elaine tried to wedge herself back into our lives. One brisk morning, a knock at the door disrupted the quiet. I opened it to find Elaine standing there, eyes red, a picture of contrition. Maya, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I know I've made some terrible mistakes. Can we talk? Her voice trembled, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerability of a woman who realized she had gone too far. I'm listening, I said, guardedly, leaving the door ajar as a reminder that she was not welcome to step inside. I've been so foolish, so driven by my own desires, that I lost sight of what's important. I've hurt you and Tom deeply, and I'm sorry. Truly, I am. Can we start over? Please? Elaine, after everything that's happened, it's not that simple. Tom and I are moving forward with adopting a child. That's our focus now, I said, the firmness in my voice reflecting the resolve in my heart. The mention of adoption triggered something in her, her face contorting as the old prejudices bubbled to the surface. You can't seriously be considering bringing someone else's child into this family. It's wrong. That's exactly what we are doing, Elaine. And it's not your decision. It's ours. I shot back, my patience fraying. This is madness, Maya. You're making a mistake. A real family. No, Elaine. We're done here. Without waiting for her to respond, I closed the door firmly in her face, the click of the latch sounding like the final seal on our relationship. Inside, Tom was standing at the top of the stairs, having heard the exchange. Everything okay? He asked, coming down to join me. I think it finally is, I said, leaning into his embrace. I told her we're adopting, and she didn't take it well. It's really over this time. Tom nodded, his expression resolute. Let's make it official then. Together, we blocked Elaine's number on our phones and sent messages to our friends and family, explaining that we had decided to sever ties with her for the sake of our future family's peace and well-being. The adoption process moved forward, and each step brought with it a surge of excitement and anticipation. We filled out forms, attended interviews, and prepared a room filled with love and the promise of new beginnings. As the waiting drew to a close, I felt a pull towards my old life, the classroom. I returned to teaching, the joy of interacting with the children rekindling a light within me that had dimmed during those dark times. Standing in front of my class, I realized how much I had grown, how resilient I had become. The children's laughter echoed through the halls, a sweet sound that filled the empty spaces left by lost dreams. It reminded me that while some doors close, others open. And behind this new door was a future bright with the colors of hope and the laughter of a child who would call us Mom and Dad. I'm Emma. My first big break after college was landing a job at Mason Trading Company as a lawyer's assistant. It was a bustling place, always buzzing with activity and ringing phones that hardly ever stopped. I loved the pace, it kept me on my toes. In those early days, while I was still figuring out which elevator took me where, I ran into Tom. He worked in the purchasing department, just a corridor away from our legal offices. He was arguing over the phone about some shipment that got delayed. He hung up, noticed me watching, and rolled his eyes. Suppliers, he muttered. Tough day? I asked, half smiling. You could say that. Every day is a battlefield here. You knew? Yeah, just started this week. I'm Emma. Tom. Welcome to the madness. Don't let the chaos scare you off. We started having lunch together, mostly because it was easier to navigate the huge cafeteria with someone who knew the place. Tom was easy to talk to, had a sharp wit, and wasn't shy about saying exactly what he thought. One lunch turned into many, and soon, those lunches turned into after-work drinks. Our conversations ranged from mundane work stuff to more personal topics. I learned he was an only child, adored by his mother, but constantly nagged for not living up to his potential, whatever that meant. You haven't met my mom yet, but brace yourself when you do, Tom warned one evening as we grabbed beers after a particularly long day. She has this idea of the perfect woman, and trust me, no one's good enough. It wasn't long before our friendship took a romantic turn. After about a year of dating, Tom proposed. The wedding was simple, but perfect, for us. We bought an apartment together with savings I had from my grandma and his savings. It felt like everything was falling into place. Life with Tom was mostly smooth, except for the occasional bickering about who forgot to buy milk or whose turn it was to clean the apartment. But nothing too heavy, just the usual stuff couples go through. Until one day, everything felt different. I was exhausted all the time, and even the smell of coffee, which I loved, made me nauseous. One morning, struggling to even get out of bed, I decided enough was enough. I booked an appointment with my doctor, thinking maybe I had the flu or something. Sitting in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine without really reading it, my name was finally called. Dr. Lena was always straight to the point, and after a few questions and tests, she dropped the news. Well, Emma, congratulations are in order. You're pregnant. Pregnant? I repeated, the word foreign and heavy. Are you sure? Quite sure, Dr. Lena smiled, handing me the test result. But you need to be careful. Your body's signaling a few warning signs. Nothing too scary, but you need rest, less stress. I nodded, my mind racing. Pregnant. How would Tom react? I couldn't tell over the phone. This needed a face-to-face. Walking through the door of our apartment that evening, I found Tom on the couch, eyes glued to his phone. Tom, we need to talk, I said, my voice shaky. I went to the doctor today. We're going to have a baby. Tom's face changed. It wasn't the reaction I'd hoped for. A baby? Emma, it's not great timing, you know? We haven't even traveled like we talked about. And a baby? That's a huge change. I felt a pang in my heart. I know it's unexpected, but it's also kind of amazing, right? We're going to be parents. Tom ran his hands through his hair, a sign he was stressed. I don't know, Emma. It's too much. It's too soon. Too soon for a family with me? I asked, hurt coloring my tone. No, that's not what I mean. I just thought we'd have more time, just us two. The conversation went in circles. Tom saying it was bad timing, me trying to highlight the positive. By the end of it, Tom had closed off, and I was left feeling alone, holding on to a piece of news that should have brought us together but instead was pushing us apart. The next day, I spoke to my boss, Mr. Harlow. I needed some accommodation, given the doctor's orders. Mr. Harlow, I need to ask for a change. I'm pregnant, and there are some complications. Could I possibly work from home? Mr. Harlow, who was always more understanding than I gave him credit for, didn't hesitate. Of course, Emma. We'll set up everything you need at home. Take care of yourself and the little one. Going home that day, I hoped Tom had softened a bit. But when I told him about the remote work arrangement, his reaction was cold. So, you're just going to be home now? What about all the plans we had? I thought you'd be happy I found a solution to keep the stress down, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma, it's like you're not even listening. I said it's too soon for all this. Tom snapped back. I went to bed early that night, feeling the distance between us grow. As I lay there, the reality of my situation sinking in, I realized this journey was going to be tougher than I thought. The air in our apartment felt heavier these days, like each day was a cloudy one, even if the sun was shining outside. Tom's affection seemed to drain away as quickly as it came. He grew more distant, more irritated by the small ways my life had to change because of the pregnancy. He said he felt neglected, like he was second to my health and the baby's needs. His mom, Mrs. Blackwell, was no help either. She called one afternoon, her voice as cold as the winter wind. "Emma, this child. It's not the right time. You should be focusing on supporting Tom, not dragging him into fatherhood." I clenched the phone tighter, fighting the sting in my eyes. "It's not like I planned this by myself, Mrs. Blackwell. It's our child, not just mine. There are options, you know. You're just choosing the most selfish one." Her words sliced through me, leaving me feeling hollow inside. As if that wasn't enough, Tom's behavior started changing even more. His cologne was masked by another scent, a woman's perfume, unfamiliar and sweet, clinging to his clothes. The first time I smelled it, I convinced myself it was a mix-up at the dry cleaner. But then, it happened again. And again. He also started staying out late, mumbling about needing to catch up on work, and his weekends were booked up with sudden business trips. It was too much to chalk up to coincidence. I held my tongue, not wanting to believe the worst, but the seed of doubt was planted. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That Saturday, when Tom mentioned another business trip, I reached out to Mike, an old classmate who now worked as a detective. We met at a small cafe, the kind where you could talk without every table overhearing your conversation. Mike slid a folder across the table to me. "I got what you asked for, Emma. You sure you want to see this?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, and opened the folder. The photos were clear, unmistakable. There was Tom, and with him, a woman I recognized from his office, a new hire that he'd mentioned in passing. "Emma, I'm sorry," Mike said, his voice low. "There's video too. It's consistent." My heart sank to the soles of my feet. "Thanks, Mike. I needed to know." I went home, numb and carrying the folder like it was made of lead. As I turned the key in the lock, the door swung open. Mrs. Blackwell stood there, her face twisted in disapproval. "I came to see how you are. Tom said he's worried about you, all alone here." Her eyes darted around, suspiciously. "I know about Tom. He's not on a business trip. He's with someone else, Mrs. Blackwell." She scoffed, her defense quick and sharp. "You're driving him away. Always sick, complaining, needing things. What man wants that?" "That's no excuse for cheating," I shot back, anger rising. "And you think having his baby will fix things?" "No one in the family wants this child, Emma. Only you." Her words were like a physical blow. "Get out," I said, my voice trembling. "Now." She threw her hands up and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence after was deafening. I sat on the couch, feeling numb and hollow. 30 minutes felt like an eternity as each second passed with heavy, painful ticks, echoing the throbbing in my heart. My mind was racing, but a dreadful resolve settled over me. I had to face Tom and see the truth with my own eyes. Mike had given me all the details I needed. There at the Grandview Hotel, room 718, he'd said, his voice filled with reluctant professionalism. My hands were shaking slightly as I parked the car and walked into the hotel lobby, my stomach in knots. I took the elevator, my heart pounding in my ears with each floor it passed. When the doors opened, I stepped out into a brightly lit hallway that felt too cheery for what I was about to do. Room 718 was just down the hall, and as I approached, I could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses. My hand trembled as I knocked on the door. "Room service must be here with the champagne." I heard a woman's voice, chirpy and carefree. After a few seconds that felt like hours, the door swung open. Tom looked out, his expression changing from anticipation to shock in an instant. "Emma? What? How did you find?" "I know everything, Tom," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Without waiting for an invitation, I pushed past him into the room. The sight that greeted me was like a slap. There she was, his mistress, half-dressed, scrambling to cover up as if modesty meant anything now. Tom recovered from his initial shock and his face hardened. "Why are you here, Emma? To spy on me? To beg?" "Beg?" I echoed, incredulous, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "I came for the truth, not that you'd know anything about that." He scoffed, stepping closer. "You want the truth? Here it is. I'm not happy with you anymore. You're always so wrapped up in yourself and this baby." His mistress, now somewhat dressed, smirked and added, "Maybe if you paid more attention to him, he wouldn't be with me." Her words stung, but it was his agreement, the nod he gave her, that twisted the knife deeper. "Yeah, you should be thanking us. We're just waiting for your baby to be born. Then I can finally move on properly." The room spun around me, and a sharp pain stabbed through my abdomen. I doubled over, gasping, the shock and pain mingling into a nauseating swirl. "Tom, I think something's wrong," I managed to say, my voice a whisper of desperation. "Please, call an ambulance." He and his mistress exchanged a look, a quick, dismissive glance, and then he turned back to me. "You're probably just overreacting, like always." They dressed quickly, stepping over me as if I were just another obstacle in their path. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the closing door, the click of it shutting echoing ominously in the cold, empty room. I woke up to the gentle, yet urgent, voice of a maid trying to rouse me. Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her face swam into view as I blinked away, the darkness clouding my vision. The pain was still there, a dull ache that seemed to echo through my entire body. "Where am I?" My voice sounded hoarse, foreign even to my own ears. "You're still in the hotel room, dear. I found you on the floor. I'm calling an ambulance now." True to her word, the next thing I knew, I was being wheeled through the emergency room. The hospital lights were harsh, blinding, as nurses and doctors swarmed around, their voices a cacophony of concern that I could barely comprehend. They asked questions, too many questions, but all I could think about was the betrayal and the pain. Tom never showed up at the hospital. Neither did his mother. Calls went unanswered, their silence more painful than any physical wound. By the time the doctor came with the news that I had lost the baby, the grief was so heavy, so overwhelming, it was all I could do not to scream. The loss was not just a personal tragedy, it felt like an injustice, one that Tom, his mistress, and his mother had a hand in. They had abandoned me, left me alone at my most vulnerable. The bitterness and anger stewed inside me, brewing a storm. After what felt like an eternity, the hospital discharged me. I drove straight to our apartment and began packing Tom's things. Each shirt I folded, each sock I threw into the box, was a severance, a cutting of ties. With his belongings piled in the trunk of my car, I drove to Mrs. Blackwell's house. I didn't bother with niceties. I unloaded his things right in the driveway, letting them fall wherever they may. I didn't knock, I just walked in. Mrs. Blackwell was sitting in the living room, a look of resignation on her face. She knew why I was there. "Emma," she started, her tone weary, "you should just leave. Take what dignity you have left." "Dignity?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I came here for a lecture on dignity from you? He's my son. I stand by him. And he will be better off without you," she said bluntly. "He has excellent lawyers. You'll only embarrass yourself." At that, something snapped inside me. "Do you even care that your grandchild is gone? That your son left me alone in a hotel room to lose his child?" Her eyes flickered away, unable to meet mine. "It's a tough situation." "It's done, Emma." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "How did you feel, as a mother, knowing what happened? Knowing your grandchild was lost?" She didn't answer, just looked away, a crack in her composed facade. "I will see your son in court," I said, the words heavy with promise. "You can tell him that." Turning on my heel, I left her sitting there, alone with the weight of her choices. As I walked back to my car, the cool air felt sharp against my skin, but my path had never been clearer. I would fight. Not just for me, but for the life that was lost, and for the truth that needed seeing the light of day. Stepping into the courthouse, I felt every eye on me, or maybe it was just the weight of what was about to happen pressing down. My best friend from college, Lucy, was right beside me. She'd become a shark in the courtroom, known for tearing apart even the slickest defense. When I told her about everything, she didn't hesitate. "I've got this, Emma. And don't worry about the fees. This one's on me," Lucy had said, her voice fierce and reassuring. We sat at our table, papers neatly arranged, evidence at the ready. Across from us, Tom and his mistress looked confident, a smugness that irked me. As the proceedings began, their lawyer painted a picture of me as unstable, broken by grief into fabricating stories. The plaintiff has suffered immense emotional distress, yes, which has led to these wild accusations. There is no substantial evidence of any affair or wrongdoing on my client's part. When it was our turn, Lucy stood, her presence commanding the room. "Your Honor, not only do we have substantial evidence, but we also have a testimony that will corroborate everything my client has claimed." She presented the photos first, clear and undeniable proof of the affair, passed around for the judge and eventually to the opposing counsel who looked visibly shaken as they viewed them. Next, Lucy played the video from the hotel. The room fell silent as the scene played out. I enter the hotel, then Tom and his mistress, laughing, hugging, leave the hotel without a hint of concern. "But that's not all," Lucy continued. She called the maid who found me to the stand. Her testimony was simple, but powerful. "I found her on the floor, unconscious. They were gone. She could have died." Tom's face had gone white, and his mistress couldn't sit still, her leg bouncing nervously. When they were given a chance to respond, Tom stood up, his voice shaky. This isn't how it looks. We were just scared and confused." "Scared? So you leave your pregnant wife unconscious on the floor?" Lucy shot back, her tone icy. The judge took everything into consideration, the weight of the evidence, the testimonies. After what felt like a lifetime, he spoke. "I find in favor of the plaintiff, Emma Blackwell. The evidence of infidelity and negligence is overwhelming. I am granting a 50-50 division of all marital assets, as well as financial compensation for the emotional distress caused by the actions of the defendants." As we walked out of the courtroom, Lucy elbowed me gently, a victorious glint in her eye. "How's that for justice?" I managed a small smile, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. "Thanks, Lucy. I couldn't have done this without you." Life had been limping back to normal after the courtroom drama. I bought a small apartment, and every new piece of furniture, every picture hung, was a step away from my past torment. The only shadow that loomed over my fresh start was seeing Tom and his mistress together at work, a constant reminder of the betrayal. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some legal briefs, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a while. It was Tom's mother, Mrs. Blackwell. "Emma, could we meet?" I need to talk to you." Her voice trembled over the phone. I hesitated, memories of our last encounter flashing through my mind. "Why should I meet you, Mrs. Blackwell?" "It's about Tom, and your company." "Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Curiosity piqued and a bit of old loyalty to the company that stood by me, I agreed. We met at a small cafe, away from prying eyes. She looked worn, her eyes rimmed with red, as if she had been crying. "Tom, he's not the boy I raised anymore," she started, not meeting my eyes. "He and that woman, they're planning to cheat the company, sell off assets, and they want to force me out of my home." Her words hung heavy between us. I was still processing when she grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please, you're the only one I can trust to stop this." The plea in her eyes was real, but so was my reluctance. "Mrs. Blackwell, your family drama is not my business anymore." "It's not just family, Emma. It's your company too. They're planning something big. It could ruin everything." Her urgency struck a chord. I was, after all, part of that company. It had given me a chance when I was just a college grad, and many of my colleagues were like family. All right, I'll look into it, I conceded, more for the company than for her. Back at work, I started digging. I quietly pulled records and contracts, tracing the trail of transactions Tom and his mistress were involved in. It didn't take long to spot irregularities. The numbers didn't add up, goods were being purchased at inflated prices, far above market value. Armed with evidence, I made my way to the director's office. Laying the documents on his desk, I watched his eyes narrow as he scanned the evidence. "This is serious," Mr. Harlow stated flatly, looking up at me. "I'll handle this from here. Thank you, Emma. You may have just saved this company from a significant loss." Leaving his office, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. Walking past Tom and his mistress, I caught snippets of their mocking laughter. I couldn't help but smile to myself. Justice had a way of finding its path, no matter how twisted the road might be. After exposing Tom and his mistress, a full-scale investigation rippled through the company. As it unfolded, I was often called to testify, detailing every discrepancy and irregular transaction I had uncovered. The courtroom once again became a familiar setting, but this time I stood confidently, bolstered by the truth and the mountains of evidence that supported our claims. The legal battles were intense and draining. Tom and his mistress faced the consequences head-on. The company, having suffered significant potential losses, pursued justice relentlessly, culminating in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the duo. The verdict was as expected, guilty. The court's decision barred them from holding any senior positions in the future, a fitting end to their corporate malfeasance. Amidst the chaos, my own career took a surprising but welcome turn. The company recognized my efforts and promoted me to a senior lawyer, an acknowledgement that came with a significant award. One quiet afternoon, as I was organizing files in my new office, a spacious room with a view of the city skyline, my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I hadn't seen in a long while. "Mrs. Blackwell." "Emma, it's me," her voice came through, tinged with humility, a stark contrast to our last encounters. I wanted to thank you for saving my home from being sold out from under me." Her gratitude was genuine, and despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. "You're welcome. I did what I felt was right." There was a pause, a breath of silence, before she added, "I was wrong about you, Emma. So very wrong. I used to think you didn't deserve my son, but I've come to realize it was he who didn't deserve you." Her words, unexpected and raw, took me by surprise. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you might know. Could we meet? I'd like to apologize properly, face to face," she suggested, a hint of hope in her tone. I considered her request. "All right, Mrs. Blackwell. Let's meet." We decided on a quiet cafe, neutral ground, for what was to be a frank conversation. Sitting across from her, I saw the changes the months had wrought on her. Gone was the haughty demeanor, replaced by a somber reflectiveness. "Emma, I'm sorry for everything. I was blinded by my own expectations, my own desires for Tom, that I couldn't see the truth. You were always the stronger person, and I admire that deeply now," she confessed, her eyes not meeting mine. "It's been a tough journey for us all," I acknowledged, my voice steady. "But your apology is accepted, Mrs. Blackwell." We talked more, about life, about lessons learned. It was clear that friendship wasn't on the table, but mutual respect hung in the balance, a fine thread that connected our shared history. Leaving the cafe, I felt lighter, as if her words had lifted some of the shadows of the past. I walked back to my office, past the now empty desks of Tom and his mistress, a reminder of the bullet dodged. Their laughter no longer echoed through the halls. Instead, my own steps sounded a steady beat towards the future. My name is Tasha, and 5 years ago, I married Tom, thinking we shared the same dreams and ambitions. We moved into my luxury apartment on the top floor of a high-rise building, with a view that took my breath away every time I looked out the window. I worked as the head of the financial department in a trading company, and my career was on a steep upward trajectory. Tom's mother, Linda, lived nearby and visited us often. From the beginning, she made it clear that she didn't approve of my career-oriented lifestyle. "A woman's place is in the home," she'd say, her lips pursed in disapproval. "You should be taking care of your husband, not gallivanting off to work every day." I tried to keep the peace, smiling and nodding when Linda went on her tirades about the duties of a good wife. But inside, I was seething. I had made it clear to Tom from the start that I wanted to build my career before settling down to have children. He had agreed then, but as time went on, I could see him wavering under his mother's influence. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find Tom and Linda sitting at our dining table, heads close together in conversation. They fell silent as soon as I walked in, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Tasha," Tom said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." I dropped my bag and sat down, my heart pounding. "What's wrong?" Linda spoke up first. "Tasha, dear, we're worried about you. All this work, it's not healthy. You're neglecting your home, your husband. When are you going to start thinking about having children?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Linda, Tom and I have discussed this. We agreed that we'd focus on our careers first, then think about starting a family." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Tasha, maybe it's time to reconsider. We're not getting any younger, and Mom's right. The apartment's a mess, and I'm tired of eating takeout every night." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Tom, are you serious? We talked about this. You know how important my job is to me. More important than your family?" Linda interjected, her voice sharp. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "My job is how I'm building a future for our family." "I thought you understood that, Tom." I stormed out of the room, locking myself in our bedroom. As I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of my troubles. Little did I know how right I was. The next morning, I left for work before Tom woke up. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let anyone, not even my husband, derail my ambitions. I had worked too hard to get where I was, and I wasn't about to give it all up now. I arrived at the office earlier than usual and stayed late into the night, determined to prove my worth. My dedication didn't go unnoticed. A few hours later, my secretary buzzed me. "Mrs. Thompson, the president would like to see you in his office." My heart raced as I made my way to the top floor. Mr. Johnson, our company president, was known for his shrewd business acumen and his tendency to spring surprises on his employees. "Tasha, come in," he said as I knocked on his door. "Have a seat." I perched on the edge of the leather chair across from his desk, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "I've been watching your work closely," Mr. Johnson began, his face unreadable. "And I must say, I'm impressed." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you, sir." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We're expanding, Tasha. Merging with a large company from another city. It's a big move, and we need our best people on it." My pulse quickened. Was this going where I thought it was? "I'm planning to promote you," he continued. "Head of a new department. But I won't lie to you, Tasha. It's going to be tough. You'll have to work harder than you've ever worked before. Are you up for it?" I thought about Tom and Linda, about their expectations of me. Then I thought about all the late nights I'd spent poring over financial reports, the satisfaction I felt when a project came together perfectly. "Absolutely, sir," I said firmly. "And I accept. I won't let you down." As I left Mr. Johnson's office, I felt like I was walking on air. This was what I'd been working towards all these years. I couldn't wait to share the news with Tom. Surely, when he saw how successful I was becoming, he'd understand why my career was so important to me. On my way home, I stopped at our favorite restaurant and ordered all of Tom's favorite dishes. I picked up a bottle of champagne and a bouquet of roses. This was cause for celebration, and I was determined to make it special. I juggled the bags as I unlocked our apartment door. "Tom?" I called out. "I'm home. And I've got a surprise." I found him in the living room, sprawled on the couch, the TV blaring. He barely looked up as I entered. "Tom, you won't believe what happened today," I said, my excitement bubbling over. "I'm getting promoted. Head of a new department. Isn't that amazing?" Tom muted the TV and turned to face me, his expression far from the joy I'd expected. "So, you'll be working even more now, is that it?" I felt my smile falter. "Well, yes, but think about what this means for us. We'll be able to afford that big house we've always talked about. Regular trips around the world. Our future is set." Tom stood up abruptly. "Our future? What future, Tasha? You're never home as it is. When was the last time we had dinner together? When was the last time we even had a real conversation?" I gestured helplessly at the bags I'd brought home. "That's why I brought dinner. I thought we could celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Tom's voice rose. "Celebrate you abandoning our marriage for your job? Celebrate the fact that I married a woman who cares more about her career than having a family?" I felt tears pricking at my eyes. "I thought you'd be happy for me," I whispered. Tom's face softened for a moment, then hardened again. "I can't do this anymore, Tasha. Something has to change." With that, he stormed off to his office, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the middle of our living room, surrounded by the trappings of the celebration that would never happen, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. As I mechanically put away the food and poured myself a glass of champagne, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the price of success? And if it was I willing to pay it? One evening, as I was leaving the office, I had an idea. I'd hire a housekeeper. Someone to clean the apartment and cook meals. It would solve Tom's complaints about the messy apartment and lack of home-cooked food. Satisfied with my solution, I made the necessary arrangements. 2 weeks later, I came home to find the apartment spotless, the air filled with the aroma of a home-cooked meal. I smiled to myself, certain that Tom would be pleased. I heard the front door open and close. "Tom?" I called out. "I'm home. And dinner's ready." He walked into the kitchen, his eyes darting around the clean space. "What's all this?" "I hired a housekeeper," I explained, unable to keep the pride out of my voice. "She cleans and cooks. I thought it would make things easier for both of us." Instead of the gratitude I expected, Tom's face clouded over. "So, this is your solution? Hire someone else to do your job?" "That's not fair," I protested. "I'm trying to find a balance." "Balance?" Tom laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call this? Tell me, Tasha, now that you've found a replacement for yourself in the kitchen, are you going to find a replacement for yourself in our bed too?" I recoiled as if he'd slapped me. "How dare you?" I hissed. "I've done nothing but try to make our life better, and this is how you react." Tom turned away. "I'm going out. Don't wait up." The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone in the immaculate kitchen, the untouched dinner growing cold on the table. Over the next few days, Tom and I barely spoke. I buried myself in work, focusing on the upcoming merger. It was easier to deal with spreadsheets and financial projections than the mess my personal life had become. Then, one rare Saturday when I didn't have to go into the office, I decided to make an effort. I spent the morning cooking Tom's favorite meals, set the table with our best china, and even put on the dress he'd bought me for our last anniversary. When Tom came home, I was waiting with a smile. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Just the two of us." Tom looked at me for a long moment, then nodded silently. My heart leapt. Maybe this was the turning point we needed. I was just about to serve the appetizer when the doorbell rang. Confused, I went to answer it. There, standing in the hallway, was Linda. "Linda," I said, unable to keep the surprise out of my voice. "We weren't expecting you." "Oh, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "Tom, darling, there you are." I watched in dismay as my carefully planned romantic dinner turned into an impromptu family gathering. Linda dominated the conversation, peppering her small talk with not-so-subtle digs at my housekeeping and lack of maternal instincts. "You know," she said, helping herself to more wine, "in my day, a woman knew her place was in the home. We took pride in taking care of our husbands, raising our children." I stood up abruptly. "I think it's time for dessert," I said, fleeing to the kitchen. As I leaned against the counter, trying to regain my composure, I could hear Linda's voice drifting in from the dining room. "Tom, darling, you need to talk some sense into her. A woman's duty is to her family first. Everything else is secondary." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would be. I had a successful career, a beautiful home, but at what cost? As I listened to Linda's continued lecture on the virtues of traditional family values, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a terrible mistake somewhere along the way. One evening, I came home later than usual, my mind still buzzing with the day's meetings. As I opened the door to our apartment, I froze. There, scattered across the living room floor, were baby clothes. Tiny onesies, miniature socks, even a small pair of shoes. "Tom?" I called out, my voice wavering. "What's all this?" He emerged from the bedroom, a strange look on his face. "Oh, Mom brought those over. She thought it might help you get in the mood." I picked up a small t-shirt, my fingers trembling. "In the mood for what, exactly?" "For starting a family, of course," Tom said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Tasha, we're not getting any younger. It's time we seriously considered having children." I spent the rest of the evening silently putting away the baby clothes, my mind in turmoil. Was I being selfish? Was my ambition destroying my marriage? The next morning, I woke up to find more baby items strategically placed around the apartment. A rattle on the coffee table, a baby book on my nightstand, a high chair in the kitchen. Linda's handiwork, no doubt. I tried to ignore them, but they seemed to multiply. Every day, there was something new. It was as if the apartment was slowly transforming into a nursery, whether I wanted it to or not. One night, I came home to find Linda sitting on our couch, flipping through a parenting magazine. "Linda," I said, unable to keep the irritation out of my voice. "I didn't know you were coming over." She looked up, a saccharine smile on her face. "Oh, Tasha, dear. I hope you don't mind. Tom said I could wait for him here. He's just popped out to get some groceries." I nodded stiffly, heading to the bedroom to change. When I came back out, Linda was standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. "You know, Tasha," she said, not turning around. "A view like this is wasted on just two people. Imagine how lovely it would be to have a child toddle up to this window, their little hands pressed against the glass, eyes wide with wonder." I felt a headache coming on. "Linda, I appreciate your concern, but Tom and I will decide when we're ready for children." She turned to face me, her eyes hard. "And when will that be, Tasha? When you've worked yourself into an early grave? When it's too late?" I opened my mouth to argue, but at that moment, Tom walked in, arms full of grocery bags. He looked between us, sensing the tension. "Everything okay here?" he asked cautiously. Linda's demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, everything's fine, darling. I was just having a little chat with Tasha about family planning." Tom's eyes lit up. "Really? That's great. I knew you'd come around, Tasha." I felt cornered, outnumbered. I need some air," I mumbled, grabbing my coat and rushing out of the apartment. A few weeks later, I stumbled through the front door, exhausted from another long day at work. The sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. There, padding around our living room in fluffy pink pajamas, was Linda. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice rising with each word. Tom emerged from the kitchen, a defiant look on his face. I've decided that Mom is going to live with us. You're always at work, always away from home. I'm tired of being alone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You decided? Without even discussing it with me? When are you ever here to discuss anything?" Tom shot back. I turned to Linda, who was watching our exchange with a smug smile. "You can't stay here. This is my home." Tom's face darkened. "If you're not happy with this arrangement, you can get out." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me? I bought this apartment before we even got married. It's registered in my name. You can't kick me out of my own home." Linda stood up, her face twisted with anger. She took a threatening step towards me. "Now listen here, you ungrateful." I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't come any closer, Linda. If you lay a hand on me, I'll call the police." Linda's face crumpled. She collapsed onto the sofa, clutching her chest dramatically. "Oh, Tom," she wailed. "Did you hear that? She threatened to call the police on me." "Your own wife, threatening your mother? Oh, how she's hardened. That awful job of hers has turned her into a monster." Tom rushed to his mother's side, shooting me a venomous look. "How could you, Tasha? Your own mother-in-law." I couldn't take it anymore. Without another word, I stormed off to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind me. I spent a restless night tossing and turning, my mind racing with the absurdity of the situation. The next morning, I was awakened by my phone ringing. It was Mr. Johnson, my boss. "Tasha, I need you on a plane today," he said without preamble. "We're ready to move forward with the merger. I need you in Chicago ASAP." I've never packed so quickly in my life. As I wheeled my suitcase to the front door, I was met with the stony faces of Tom and Linda. "I have to go on a business trip," I said, my voice cold. "It's for the merger. I'll be back soon." Tom's lip curled. "Don't bother coming back at all." The flight to Chicago was a blur. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. The merger negotiations were intense, requiring all of my focus and energy. But in the quiet moments, when I was alone in my hotel room, the reality of my situation came crashing down. After a grueling week of negotiations and sleepless nights, I finally returned home. As I stood outside my apartment door, suitcases at my feet, I felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. I just wanted to collapse into my own bed and forget about the world for a while. I inserted my key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. Frowning, I tried again. Nothing. A cold feeling of dread washed over me as I realized what must have happened. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. After a moment, it swung open. There stood Tom and Linda, both wearing casual house clothes, looking at me with a mixture of smugness and disdain. "Why doesn't my key work?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom let out a harsh laugh. "I changed the locks," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "You can come in if you're ready to choose your family over your precious career." I stood there, stunned. "What are you talking about?" Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of papers. With a flourish, he presented them to me. "Divorce papers," he said. "It's time to choose, Tasha. Your career or your home. What's it going to be?" I looked at Tom, really looked at him, and in that moment, I realized something profound. I didn't love him anymore. The man I had married was gone, replaced by this bitter, manipulative stranger. Linda's shrill voice cut through my thoughts. "Well, we're waiting. Make your choice." I took a deep breath, straightening my spine. "I choose my career," I said, my voice steady. "Because I don't have a family or a husband." "Not anymore." Tom's face twisted with anger, but he thrust a pen at me. With a steady hand, I signed the divorce papers right there in the hallway. As soon as I finished, Linda grabbed my arm and roughly pushed me towards the elevator. "Good riddance," she spat, slamming the door behind me. I stood there, staring at the closed door of what used to be my home. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, bordering on hysterical. I had just been kicked out of my own apartment, the one I had bought with my hard-earned money. Too tired to make a scene, I gathered my suitcases and made my way to a nearby hotel. A few hours later, I received a call from my friend Rachel, a realtor I had worked with when buying the apartment. "Tasha, hon, how are you doing?" Rachel asked, concern evident in her voice. "I've been better," I admitted. "Why do you ask?" Rachel hesitated. "I've seen Tom's posts on social media. He's saying some pretty nasty things about you." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "He's calling you a soulless careerist who destroyed your family for the sake of your job. Says he sacrificed everything for your relationship and you just used him and tossed him aside. He's even talking about suing you for alimony. People are really sympathizing with him, Tasha." I felt a surge of anger. "That's not what happened at all." "I didn't think so," Rachel said. "Want to tell me your side?" I gave her a brief rundown of the events of the past week. When I finished, Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Oh, Tasha," she finally said. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. Listen, I'm going to set the record straight with our friends and colleagues. People need to know the truth." "Thanks, Rachel," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "I really appreciate that." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger at Tom's lies, gratitude for Rachel's support, and a growing determination. Tom might have taken my home for now, but I wasn't going to let him take my reputation or my dignity. The vibration of my phone startled me out of my thoughts. Mr. Johnson's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach dropped. I took a deep breath and answered. "Tasha, we need to talk," Mr. Johnson said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "I've heard some concerning things on social media." I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. "Sir, I can explain dash." "No need to explain, Tasha," he interrupted. "I want to hear your side of the story." Relief washed over me. I took a deep breath and launched into the whole sordid tale, the arguments, Linda moving in, being locked out of my own apartment, and Tom's social media smear campaign. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, to my surprise, Mr. Johnson chuckled. "Tasha, do you really think I'd believe that nonsense your ex is spouting?" he said. "I know you. I've seen your dedication, your work ethic. Don't let this affect your confidence. You have every right to defend yourself, and I want you to know that the company stands behind you." Tears of relief pricked at my eyes. "Thank you, sir. You don't know how much that means to me." A couple of days later, my phone pinged with a social media notification. Tom was doing a live broadcast from my apartment. Curious, I tapped on the video. There was Tom, grinning at the camera, surrounded by a film crew. "Hey everyone! Exciting news, we're about to start a major renovation on our apartment. The crew from Extreme Makeover, Home Edition will be here in 2 weeks to transform this place." I stared at the screen, a plan forming in my mind. Instead of anger, I felt a sense of calm determination. I picked up my phone and dialed Rachel's number. "It's Tasha. I need a huge favor," I said the moment she answered. "I need you to sell my apartment. Fast. Like, within 2 weeks fast." Rachel let out a low whistle. "That's a tall order, Tasha. What's the rush?" I quickly explained about Tom's renovation plans. "I need new owners in there before that film crew arrives." "But Tasha, how am I supposed to show the apartment? Tom changed the locks, remember?" I sent her the most recent photos I had of the place. "These will have to do." "I know it's not ideal, but..." Rachel cut me off with a laugh. "Oh, honey, you underestimate me. I've got a couple who've been looking for exactly this kind of place in this area. They trust my judgment. With these photos and the reputation of the building, I think I can make this happen." 2 weeks flew by in a blur of work and anticipation. Before I knew it, the day of the big renovation reveal had arrived. I sat in my hotel room, laptop open, watching the live stream with bated breath. The camera panned across my former apartment, now filled with an excited film crew and construction workers. Tom and Linda stood in the center, beaming at the cameras. "We're so excited to start this renovation," Tom was saying, his arm around Linda's shoulders. "It's time for a fresh start, a new chapter in our lives." Just as the host was about to give the signal to start demolition, there was a commotion off camera. The door burst open, and in walked a smartly dressed couple, followed by a familiar face, Rachel. "I'm sorry, but you can't renovate this apartment," the man said, holding up a stack of papers. "It belongs to us now." The camera swung wildly as confusion erupted. Tom's face went from shock to anger. "What are you talking about? This is my home." Rachel stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Actually, Tom, this apartment belonged to your ex-wife, Tasha. She sold it to this lovely couple 2 weeks ago. Your signature on the renovation documents is a forgery." The host of the show turned to Tom, his face livid. "You forged documents? Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" Tom and Linda's faces turned a deep shade of red as the host continued to berate them on live television. The scandal unfolded in real time, with millions of viewers watching as Tom's lies came crashing down around him. I couldn't help but laugh, feeling a mix of vindication and relief. It was over. I had won. With the proceeds from the sale of the apartment, I made a bold move. I bought a charming little house in the city where our company had just completed its merger. It felt poetic, somehow a new home in the city where my career was taking off. To my delight, Mr. Johnson appointed me as the head of our newly acquired company. It was a challenge, but one I was more than ready for. Weeks later, I found myself face to face with Tom again, this time in a courtroom. He had the audacity to demand half of the proceeds from the apartment sale, plus alimony. I watched with satisfaction as the judge denied his claims, citing his attempt to unlawfully seize my property and the forged documents. As we left the courthouse, Tom approached me, his earlier bravado replaced by desperation. "Tasha, please," he begged. "I'm sorry for everything. Can't we start over? Give our marriage another chance?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of freedom. I laughed, not unkindly, but with finality. "No, Tom," I said, shaking my head. "We can't start over. But I can start anew, and that's exactly what I'm doing." As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in years. My career was soaring, I was leading a successful merger, respected by my peers and superiors alike. I had a beautiful new home, one that was truly mine. I'm Ellie, and here's where my story starts. Grew up in a small town, moved from one foster home to another until I landed with the Thompsons. They gave me something priceless, stability, something I craved all my young life. Life was plain till college. I was the first in my foster family to hit the big city for college, studied languages, Japanese, to be exact. Worked my butt off and got myself a translator job at an international trading company. It was a big deal for a small-town girl like me. One ordinary Tuesday, I walked into this cozy cafe near work, ordered my usual black coffee, and there he was, Jack. Tall, with a smile that could knock you off your feet. He was on his phone, looking all business but relaxed. I caught his eye, and that was it. "Hey, never seen you here before," I said, trying to sound casual as I sat down with my coffee. He looked up, his smile widening. "Just trying to escape the office chaos. I'm Jack," he replied, extending a hand. I shook it, feeling a spark. "I'm Ellie. So, what brings Mr. Escape the Office to my favorite spot?" "Good coffee and better company, it seems," he quipped. We hit it off from there. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before we knew it, a year had passed, and we were talking about more than just coffee. Jack was from the city, knew his way around, and had a charm that was hard to resist. But life's not all smooth sailing, right? We decided to tie the knot after a year of dating. I was over the moon but wanted him to meet the folks who made me who I am, the Thompsons. Now, my foster parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, they were salt-of-the-earth types. Lived simply, worked hard. They were fixing up their house, so they rented this tiny apartment that was nothing to write home about. But it was warm, filled with love. I remember telling Jack, "It ain't much, but it's filled with good memories." He nodded, but I saw that look in his eyes as he scanned the cramped space. He was trying to hide it, but the man was uncomfortable. We spent the weekend there. My folks were thrilled, treated him like royalty, but Jack, he was off, always checking his watch, eager to head back. As we drove back to the city that Sunday night, the silence in the car was heavy. I had to say something. "Jack, you've been quiet. What's up?" He sighed. "Look, Ellie, your folks, they're nice and all, but we come from different worlds, you know?" His words stung, but I kept my cool. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "It's just different, Ellie. I'm not used to this simple life. But hey, it doesn't change how I feel about you," he added quickly, trying to smooth things over. I looked out the window, biting my lip, thinking about all the differences between my world and his. "Jack, I don't need fancy. But we gotta respect where we both come from, right?" He nodded. "Right, of course. I love you, Ellie. That's what matters." His words were supposed to comfort me, but a part of me wondered if we were really seeing eye to eye. That night, I lay awake, thinking about the simple life I cherished and the complicated world I was stepping into. Just a few days after our uncomfortable visit back home, it was my turn to meet the other side, Jack's mom, Vivian. A high-rise in the city center, her place was decked out in all sorts of fancy stuff that screamed money. When we arrived, she greeted us at the door, decked out in designer from head to toe, and her apartment? It was like walking into a magazine. "Ellie, is it? And what is it you do?" Vivian asked, sizing me up as if I were an item she was considering purchasing. "I'm a translator. I work with Japanese clients at a trading company," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Oh, impressive," she half smiled, but her eyes were doing another sweep, like she was looking for something off about me. Then it slipped out where I was from and about my foster parents. Her face twisted a bit. "From the province, and fostered, you say? I don't think that's quite fitting for my Jack." Jack jumped in quick. "Mom, please. Ellie's wonderful, and I love her. We're getting married." That stirred up another pot. "Married? And when is this happening? How are you planning it?" Vivian's tone shifted to something a bit too curious. "We're thinking something small, intimate. Just us in Hawaii, actually," I said, hoping she'd catch on to the romance of it all. Vivian's eyes nearly popped out. "Hawaii? Just the two of you? No, that won't do. What will my friends think if I can't even throw my only son a proper wedding?" I tried to keep my cool. "It's our day, Vivian. We just want something true to us, without all the fuss." That did it. She huffed, "This discussion is over," and walked out of the room. Jack looked at me, apologetic, and whispered, "Let me talk to her. We'll sort this out." 4 months zipped by, and despite the rocky start, there we were in Hawaii. It was supposed to be just Jack and me, but Vivian showed up, camera in hand, ready to document every second. Every moment felt like she was there, lurking, making sure she had something to post online. Jack seemed oblivious, soaking in the sun and the ceremony. I tried to smile through it, whispering to him as we stood on the beach, "I thought it would be just us." He squeezed my hand. "I know, I'm sorry. She's just excited, I guess. Let's just try to enjoy our day." Vivian was buzzing around us, her phone always up. "Smile here. Oh, this will look fabulous on my feed." I felt like a prop in her social media show, not a bride on her wedding day. It was our special day, but somehow, it had turned into another one of Vivian's extravaganzas. Coming back home as newlyweds should have been all about those cozy, love-soaked days, you know, breakfast in bed, slow dances in the living room, that kind of stuff. And it was, at least at first. Jack slipped this stunning ring on my finger the day we got back, the kind that catches the light and just won't quit sparkling. It's been in my family for generations, he told me, his eyes all lit up with something like pride. Be careful with that ring, Ellie. It's more than just expensive, it's an heirloom. Vivian chimed in, hovering over us like some kind of dark cloud on a sunny day. Her reminder felt more like a warning, making my heart sink a bit. The first few weeks, Jack and I were in our little bubble, stealing kisses, making dinners together, the whole 9 yards. But then Vivian started dropping by. Unannounced. All the time. It started one afternoon when I was folding laundry and the doorbell rang. There she was, Vivian, with that look on her face like she was about to inspect a military base. Just checking in on my favorite newlyweds, she said, but her eyes darted around like she was searching for something wrong. I tried to be polite, make small talk even as she wandered into the kitchen, her fingers sliding over every surface. Ellie, darling, do you ever clean? And where are the fresh vegetables? A man needs his greens. Her tone was dripping with disapproval. Jack just shrugged it off when I told him later. She means well, babe. Just try to go with it. Go with it? I echoed, frustration bubbling up. Jack, she's treating me like I'm on trial in my own home. He kissed my forehead, all casual like that was supposed to fix everything. She's lonely, Ellie. Let's just cut her some slack, okay? Slack turned into more slack, until one day I got home late from work. We'd just signed a huge contract with a new client from Japan, and I was buzzing with the thrill of it all, that is, until I found Vivian in my living room, an uninvited storm brewing. I heard you've been spending a lot of time at the office. Late nights, She raised an eyebrow, her voice thick with suspicion. Yeah, it's a big project. Lots of new opportunities. I tried to explain, but she had a different opinion. 2 days later, Vivian personally came to my office and began counting out loud the men working with me, loudly suggesting I could be having an affair with one of them. Then, without an invitation, she barged into my boss's office. Seeing he was already elderly, she loudly proclaimed, "Well, she definitely won't mess with the old man." I was mortified, my face red as a beetroot. I demanded she leave, apologizing profusely to my boss and colleagues for the disruption. Thankfully, my boss, Mr. Jackson, had a sense of humor and just laughed it off, but the damage was done. That night, I'd had enough. I cornered Jack in our bedroom, my voice low and tight. Your mom crossed a line today, Jack. She's accusing me of cheating. It has to stop. He sighed, long and heavy. Just try to get along. Please, for me. But getting along felt more and more like putting up with nonsense. Things between Jack and me started getting rocky, and due to the fact that Vivian was always whispering in his ear. Lately, Jack had been picking apart everything about me, from the way I dressed to the hours I worked. He had never minded before, but suddenly, everything was a problem. Ellie, why you gotta wear that to work? Jack frowned one morning as I got ready. It was just a blouse and skirt combo, nothing fancy. It's professional, Jack. What's wrong with it? I replied, adjusting my skirt. It's too much. You're just inviting comments, working with all those guys. His tone had an edge, and I knew this wasn't really about my clothes. That was becoming a regular thing now. It got worse on my birthday. My boss gave me a small gift, a book with a note that read, "To my practically daughter." It was innocent, a kind gesture, but Jack blew it out of proportion. You see? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Why is he giving you gifts? It's not right, Ellie. Jack was livid when he saw the book. Jack, it's just a book. He's like a father figure to me. I tried to explain, but Jack's eyes were clouded with suspicion, all thanks to Vivian's constant meddling. All this tension was a relief to escape when I headed out on a business trip to a neighboring city. Our company was setting up a new factory, and I was looking forward to the break from all the drama at home. The trip went well, and I was wrapping up with a dinner with our Japanese partners when I noticed shadows lurking near the restaurant. My heart raced. The street was dimly lit, but as I walked towards my hotel, the shadows moved closer. Panicked, I asked two colleagues to walk me back. As we neared the hotel entrance, the light from the lanterns revealed who was following me, Jack and Vivian. "What the hell, Jack? What are you doing here?" I blurted out, unable to hide my shock. Vivian stepped forward, her face twisted in anger. "We're making sure you're not up to no good. Can't trust you around all these men, can we?" My colleagues were staring, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. Trying to calm the situation, I said, "This is ridiculous. You're both acting like I'm some kind of criminal." But Vivian wasn't having it. "I'll be telling your parents about this. They should know what kind of woman you've turned out to be." I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Go ahead, tell them. They'll laugh you out of town." The ride back was a silent one. Jack and his mother sat in the front, and I was alone in the back seat, staring out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of color as tears filled my eyes. I was married to the man I loved, but it felt like I was trapped in a bad dream, with Vivian as the relentless nightmare that wouldn't end. Vivian had actually gone through with her threat and showed up at my parents' place. I couldn't believe it when Mom called me, her voice shaking as she recounted what had just happened. "She was here, Ellie," Mom said, her voice strained. "She demanded to see your father right away, so I gave her the address to his workshop." I felt my stomach drop. Dad was at his workshop, where he spent most of his days crafting and creating in his element. Mom continued, "Your mother-in-law went there, saw your father in his work clothes, all stained from the glass dyes, and she just scoffed." I gripped the phone tighter, bracing myself. "When your father went over to greet her, he apologized for not shaking her hand. His were all stained from work, you know?" She looked at his hands, Ellie, made a face, and said something awful about coming to this backwater for nothing. My heart sank as I listened. "She said she understands now why you turned out the way you did, and just left without another word. Thanks for telling me, Mom. I need to think about what to do." I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and hurt swirling inside. It wasn't long before Vivian made her next move. The very next day, she cornered me in the living room, her eyes cold and judgmental. "Ellie, now I see where you get your manners, or should I say, lack thereof. Your father, an ordinary worker, his hands permanently dirted. What kind of upbringing, what kind of manners, could you possibly teach any children?" I shuddered to think. Her words were like daggers, but before I could respond, Jack walked in. Instead of defending me, he went straight to his mother, taking her in his arms. "Mom, I'm sorry about all this. Ellie's family, they're just different from us." That was it. The last straw. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Different? Is that your way of saying my family isn't good enough for your high standards?" My voice broke, the hurt too deep. Jack looked at me, his eyes empty. "It's just how things are, Ellie. We come from different worlds." "So that's it, huh?" My voice rose, thick with emotion. "If I'm such a disgrace, why don't we just end this? If I'm so below you, let's get a divorce." Vivian's eyes lit up, almost gleefully. "Well, that sounds like a splendid idea." Jack just nodded, passively. "Maybe that's for the best." I spent the night in our guest room, tears streaming down my face. Every word Vivian said replayed in my mind, every dismissive glance from Jack. The man I thought I knew, the life I thought we were building, it was all a lie. The early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room as I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. It was time to make some difficult calls, but necessary ones. First on my list was my boss, Mr. Jackson, whose kindness had always made the stresses of work bearable. "Mr. Jackson, it's Ellie," I started, my voice a bit shaky. "I'm facing some personal issues and need to take some time off. I can take it unpaid if necessary." "Ellie," he replied quickly, his voice laced with concern. you're one of our most valuable team members. Take a paid vacation. Sort things out and come back when you're ready. We'll manage here." His generosity brought a lump to my throat. "Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I can't tell you how much this means to me." Next, I dialed my mother, who had always been my anchor in any storm. As soon as she answered, I spilled everything, the words tumbling out in a torrent of emotion. "Mom, it's all falling apart here. I can't do this anymore. Jack and his mom, it's just too much." Her voice was calm, soothing. "Ellie, we've been prepared for this call. Your father and I are on our way. Just pack what you need." As I ended the call, I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the few personal items I'd brought into this house, none of which felt like they belonged. I started packing, each item a reminder of the life I thought I'd build with Jack. Vivian appeared at the doorway, her presence like a dark cloud. "Remember, Ellie, only take what you bought with your own money. Don't think about grabbing anything else," she said, her voice cold and accusing. It wasn't long before I heard the gravel crunch under the tires of an old vehicle. Looking out the window, I saw the familiar beat-up pickup truck that belonged to my parents. Jack and Vivian followed me outside, their expressions a mixture of smugness and curiosity as my parents' truck pulled up. Jack scoffed loudly. "Sure that old thing will even make it back?" My father, a quiet strength emanating from him, stepped out and faced Jack without a word. He handed over the divorce papers, his eyes steady and unwavering. Jack grabbed the papers and signed them with a smirk, his mother chuckling beside him. "Glad to be rid of this mess," he muttered. We arrived at my parents' home, a large, imposing structure that felt more like a sanctuary now. I spent the next few hours unpacking and trying to settle my nerves, the peace of the familiar surroundings slowly calming me. That evening, as I sat looking out at the garden, my phone rang. It was Vivian. "Ellie, you need to return the ring. It's a family heirloom, not a parting gift." I held the phone away for a moment, taking a deep breath before responding. "Vivian, that ring was given to me as a wedding gift. If you want it, come and get it yourself." The morning light was just beginning to spill over the horizon when I saw them from the upstairs window. Jack and his mother, Vivian, stood at the gate, staring up at the house as if they had stumbled into a fairy tale. Their expressions of disbelief were almost comical. I watched from behind the curtain, a smirk playing on my lips. They looked so out of place against the backdrop of the large, meticulously landscaped front yard, their confusion palpable. Finally, I turned away from the window, hearing the sounds of my parents downstairs. I joined them, and we shared a knowing look before stepping outside. My parents were calm and collected as they walked past Jack and Vivian without a word, heading straight for the garage. They pretended not to notice the bewildered stares from my estranged husband and his mother. As the garage door swung open, revealing the sleek lines of 3 high-end cars, I could hear the sharp intake of breath from Jack. My father chose a gleaming black sedan, and we all climbed in. Just as we were about to pull out onto the driveway, Jack found his voice. "Ellie, what is all this? This house, these cars?" I stepped out of the car, walking over to them with a calm I hadn't felt in months. "This is my family home, Jack. My father owns a glass factory and several commercial properties. This is where I grew up." Vivian's face contorted with confusion and disbelief. But your father, he was wearing work clothes, his hands were dirty." I couldn't help but smile at her naivete. "Yes, Vivian. He was launching a new product line. It's a tradition in his company to get involved, hands-on. It doesn't mean he's not successful or wealthy." They stood there, stunned, unable to reconcile the image of the hard-working man they'd seen with the opulence around them. At that moment, a group of our neighbors approached, their faces bright with smiles. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. We heard about your latest charity event. It's wonderful what you're doing. You've got our support in the mayoral elections, you know," one of them called out cheerfully. My parents nodded and thanked them. Jack's face was a mixture of awe and regret, his eyes darting between his mother and me. Vivian looked like she had swallowed something bitter, her earlier arrogance washed away by the undeniable reality in front of her. I turned back to the car, giving Jack and his mother one last look. "Well, I guess you see things a little differently now," I said, not unkindly. Their expressions, a mix of shock and realization, were all the confirmation I needed that the past, with all its hardships and heartaches, was finally behind me. The morning's revelations hadn't even settled when Jack made his move. He shoved his mother aside with such force that she stumbled. "It's all your fault, you know. You pushed her away with your nonsense," he shouted at her, his words laced with bitterness. Then, turning to me, his demeanor changed completely. He rushed over, trying to pull me into an embrace, his hands reaching out as if trying to erase everything with a simple touch. "Ellie, please, listen to me. We were good together, weren't we? I love you, I really do," he pleaded, his voice a desperate whisper. I recoiled from his touch, the warmth we once shared long extinguished by his betrayal. "Stop, Jack. Just stop," I said firmly, pushing him away with all the strength I could muster. I quickly got into the car, my heart pounding. My father, without a word, pressed the remote control, and the garage doors began to close behind us. Jack and his mother stood there, calling out, their voices a blend of desperation and disbelief. "Ellie, please, forgive us. We didn't mean any of it," Jack yelled, his voice cracking under the strain. Vivian, scrambling on the ground for the dignity she'd lost, joined in. "Ellie, my dear, I was wrong. Please." As we drove away, the finality of the moment weighed on me, but a part of me needed closure, a definitive end to this chapter of my life. As we reached the end of the driveway, I asked my father to stop the car. Jack, thinking this was his chance, ran up to the car, his face lit up with hope. His mother, a few paces behind, tried to catch up, her earlier elegance replaced by desperation. Without a word, I rolled down the window, pulled the wedding ring from my finger, and held it out for a brief moment. Jack's eyes widened as he realized what was about to happen. "This is where it ends, Jack," I said, my voice steady. With that, I threw the ring out of the window. It glittered briefly in the morning sun before landing on the soft grass beside the road. Jack's mother, ever the opportunist, rushed to where the ring had fallen, her hands scrambling through the grass. I rolled up the window, shutting out their pleas and the painful past they represented. "Let's go, Dad," I said quietly. 2 weeks later, I was back in the city, in a new apartment that felt more like home than I'd felt in a long time. I returned to work, where Mr. Jackson welcomed me with open arms and a gentle understanding that eased my transition back into routine. Jack made several attempts to contact me, each more desperate than the last. He claimed to have cut ties with his mother, begging for another chance. But some things, once broken, can't be mended. I told him it was over for good this time, and blocked his number. No more words were needed. My name is Hannah, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 5 years, I've been working at the National Archives and Records Administration. It's a job I've always enjoyed, surrounded by history and important documents. But lately, I've been feeling like something's missing in my life. I lost my parents when I was in my early 20s. It was a car accident, sudden and devastating. Since then, I've been on my own, throwing myself into my work and trying not to think about how lonely I felt. But as I approached my mid-30s, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I wanted a family of my own. "Hannah, you coming to the break room? We're having cake for Jim's birthday," my colleague, Lisa, called out. As I followed Lisa to the break room, I couldn't help but notice how she kept glancing at her phone, probably texting her husband. I felt a pang of envy. The break room was crowded with my coworkers, all chatting and laughing. Jim, a balding man in his 50s, was cutting the cake. "Here you go, Hannah," he said, handing me a slice. "You know, my nephew's about your age. Single too. Maybe I should introduce you too?" I forced a smile. "Thanks, Jim, but I'm okay." This wasn't the first time a coworker had tried to set me up. I'd been on a few dates with guys from work, but they all seemed, well, not what I was looking for. Too focused on their careers or too immature. I wanted someone stable, someone who understood the value of family. Later that day, as I was organizing some files, my supervisor, Mr. Johnson, approached my desk. "Hannah, I've got a new case for you. A farmer from upstate is looking for information on a neighboring plot. Says it's abandoned and he wants to buy it. Think you can handle it?" I nodded. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. I'll get right on it." "Good. He'll be coming in tomorrow morning. His name's Daniel Miller." As Mr. Johnson walked away, I couldn't help but feel a little excited. A farmer. That was different from our usual clients. I wondered what he'd be like. The next morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. I'd spent extra time on my appearance, though I tried to convince myself it was just another day. As I settled at my desk, my colleague Lisa gave me a knowing look. "Someone's looking nice today," she teased. "Hot date?" I rolled my eyes. "No, just meeting a new client. A farmer looking for property records." Just then, Mr. Johnson appeared with a man I assumed must be Daniel Miller. My jaw nearly dropped. This was not the old, bearded farmer I'd imagined. Daniel was tall, probably in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. He wore jeans and a plaid shirt, looking somewhat out of place in our office full of suits. "Hannah, this is Mr. Miller," Mr. Johnson introduced us. "He'll be working with you on finding those property records." Daniel extended his hand. "Please, call me Dan." "It's nice to meet you, Hannah." His handshake was firm, his hands calloused from hard work. I felt a flutter in my stomach that I quickly tried to squash. "Nice to meet you too, Dan. Shall we get started?" As we settled into my workspace, I couldn't help but notice how Dan's presence seemed to fill the room. He had a quiet confidence about him that was intriguing. "So, tell me about this property you're interested in," I prompted, trying to keep things professional. Dan leaned forward, his eyes lighting up. "It's the plot next to my farm. Been abandoned for years. I'm hoping to expand, maybe start an orchard. But first, I need to track down the owners." As he spoke, I found myself drawn in by his passion. It was refreshing to see someone so enthusiastic about their work. We spent the next few hours poring over old property records. Dan was surprisingly knowledgeable, asking insightful questions that made our search easier. As we worked, we fell into an easy conversation. "So, how long have you been farming?" I asked during a lull. Dan's face softened. "Born and raised on a farm. Took over from my dad about 15 years ago. It's not always easy, but I love it." There was something in his tone that made me curious. "Sounds like there's a story there." He hesitated for a moment. "Well, it's just me and my boys now. My wife, she passed away a few years back." My heart clenched. "I'm so sorry, Dan. That must be hard." He nodded, a sad smile on his face. "It is. But my boys, they keep me going. They're 7 and 5 now. Great kids." I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. I lost my parents years ago. I know it's not the same, but I understand loss. The rest of the day flew by. We made good progress on the property search, but it was clear we'd need more time. As Dan was leaving, he hesitated. "Listen, Hannah. I know this is unconventional, but would you like to grab a coffee sometime? To discuss the case, of course." I felt my heart skip a beat. "I'd like that, Dan. For the case, of course." Over the next few weeks, Dan and I met regularly, ostensibly to work on his property case. But our conversations often strayed beyond land records and legal documents. I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't with anyone in years. One day, as we were wrapping up our work, Dan hesitated. "Hannah, I hope I'm not overstepping, but would you like to come out to the farm this weekend? Meet the boys? We're having a little barbecue, nothing fancy." My heart raced. This felt like a big step. I'd love to, Dan. Are you sure the boys would be okay with it? He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. They've been asking to meet you. I may have mentioned you once or twice. That Saturday, I found myself driving out to Dan's farm. The city gradually gave way to rolling hills and open fields. As I pulled up to the farmhouse, I saw Dan and two young boys waiting on the porch. Hannah, Dan called out, waving. Come meet the boys. I stepped out of the car, suddenly nervous. The younger boy hid behind Dan's leg, while the older one eyed me curiously. Boys, this is Miss Hannah from the archives. Hannah, these are my sons, Jack and Tommy. Jack, the older boy, stepped forward. Do you really work with old stuff all day? That's cool. I laughed, feeling myself relax. I do. Maybe I can show you some interesting documents sometime. Tommy, still shy, peeked out from behind Dan. Do you like chickens? We have chickens. And just like that, the ice was broken. The boys led me on a tour of the farm, showing me their favorite spots and introducing me to various animals. Dan followed behind, a soft smile on his face. As the day went on, I found myself falling into an easy rhythm with Dan and the boys. We grilled burgers, played catch in the yard, and ended the evening roasting marshmallows over a small fire. As the boys dozed off on a blanket nearby, Dan and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. Thank you for today, I said softly. It's been wonderful. Dan turned to me, his face serious. Hannah, I need to be honest with you. I like you. A lot. And I think you might feel the same. But I need you to understand, the boys and we're a package deal. It's not always easy, being a single dad and a farmer. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. Dan, I like you too. And your boys are amazing. I know it won't be easy, but I'd like to see where this goes. If you want to, that is. Dan's face broke into a wide smile. He reached out, taking my hand in his. I'd like that very much, Hannah. The months that followed were like a dream. Dan and I grew closer, and I found myself spending more and more time at the farm. The boys, Jack and Tommy, warmed up to me quickly, and I discovered a maternal instinct I never knew I had. One crisp autumn evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Dan turned to me with a serious expression. Hannah, these past 6 months have been the happiest I've had in years. I know it might seem fast, but when you know, you know. Hannah Thompson, will you marry me? Tears welled up in my eyes. Yes, Dan. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding was a simple affair, held on the farm with only our closest friends and family present. As I walked down the makeshift aisle in a simple white dress, I saw Dan waiting for me, looking handsome in his suit. Jack and Tommy stood beside him, beaming. However, my joy was slightly dampened when I overheard Dan's parents talking during the reception. She's awfully thin, isn't she? His mother muttered. Not sure she's cut out for farm life. Give her time, Martha, his father replied. She'll toughen up or she'll break. I tried to shake off their words, focusing instead on the happiness of the day. But a seed of doubt had been planted. After the honeymoon, I moved to the farm permanently. It was a big adjustment, leaving my job and city life behind. Dan suggested I quit working to focus on the house and children, and I agreed, eager to embrace my new role as wife and stepmother. At first, everything seemed perfect. I threw myself into farm life, learning to cook hearty meals, tend to the vegetable garden, and even help with some of the lighter farm work. The boys seemed to thrive under my care, and I loved reading to them at night and helping with their homework. But as weeks turned into months, I began to feel the strain. The work was endless and grueling. I'd never realized how much physical labor went into running a farm. My hands, once soft from office work, became calloused and rough. Dan's parents, who lived nearby, were frequent visitors. His mother, Martha, took every opportunity to criticize my efforts. You call this a proper farm breakfast? she'd scoff at my attempts at cooking. In my day, we'd have had 3 different kinds of meat on the table by now. I tried to brush off her comments, but they stung. Dan, busy with the farm work, seemed oblivious to my struggles. One particularly difficult day, as I was struggling to wrangle a stubborn cow into the barn, Dan called out from the tractor. "Come on, Hannah, put your back into it. Food doesn't just appear on the table, you know." I bit back a retort, feeling a mix of frustration and hurt. This wasn't the life I had imagined when I said I do. That night, as I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I'd lost weight, my hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under my eyes. The manicured nails and styled hair of my city life seemed like a distant memory. As the months wore on, the demands of farm life began to take their toll. I was up before dawn each day, preparing breakfast for Dan and the boys, packing lunches, and then diving into a never-ending list of chores. Feeding animals, cleaning coops and stalls, helping with the crops, it was relentless. One particularly grueling day, I woke up feeling awful. My head was pounding, and I could feel a fever coming on. But as I lay in bed, contemplating calling in sick, to whom, I wasn't sure, I heard a sharp knock at the bedroom door. "Hannah, are you planning to sleep all day?" It was Martha, my mother-in-law. I groaned, forcing myself to sit up. "I'm not feeling well, Martha. I think I might have a fever." She burst into the room, her face a mask of disapproval. "Nonsense. In this family, only death is an excuse not to work. Now get up and make me some breakfast. Then there's work to be done in the yard." Stunned and feeling too weak to argue, I dragged myself out of bed. As I mechanically prepared Martha's breakfast, I could feel my body protesting every movement. "Here you go," I said, placing a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. She took one bite and grimaced. "Overcooked. But it'll have to do. Now get out there and earn your keep." I stumbled out into the yard, my vision blurry and my body aching. The world seemed to spin as I made my way to the chicken coop. As I bent down to clean it out, a wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it out of the coop before vomiting. Wiping my mouth, I looked up to see Dan watching me from the tractor. "You okay?" he called out. I shook my head weakly. "I think I'm sick, Dan. I need to lie down." He frowned. "We can't afford for you to be sick right now, Hannah. The work needs to get done. Just push through it." Tears stung my eyes as I watched him turn back to his work. I felt so alone, so unsupported. This wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with. That night, as I lay in bed, my fever raging, it was Jack and Tommy who took care of me. They brought me water and cold compresses, their little faces creased with worry. "Are you gonna be okay, Hannah?" Tommy asked, his voice small. I managed a weak smile. "I'll be fine, sweetheart. Thank you for taking care of me." As the boys left the room, I heard Dan's voice in the hallway. "Boys, leave Hannah alone. She needs to rest so she can get back to work tomorrow." In that moment, something inside me snapped. This wasn't the life I wanted. This wasn't the family I dreamed of. I needed to make a change. But just as I'd made this resolution, life threw me another curveball. A few weeks later, as I was getting ready for another day of endless chores, a wave of nausea hit me. But this time, it wasn't from illness. With shaking hands, I took a pregnancy test. As I waited for the results, my mind raced. A baby? Now? How could I handle a newborn on top of everything else? When the test showed positive, I felt a mix of joy and terror. I had hoped for some reprieve from the grueling farm work, but my expectations were quickly dashed. If anything, the demands on me seemed to increase. "You're eating for 2 now," Martha would say, piling more work on my plate. "That means you should be working for 2 as well." I was 7 months along when Dan's father approached me one afternoon. "Hannah, we need to clear out the old storage room for the baby. Get to it, will you?" Exhausted and aching, I nodded silently and made my way to the cluttered room. As I sorted through years of accumulated junk, I came across a dusty old box tucked away in the corner. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, I found a leather-bound book. As I flipped it open, my heart nearly stopped. It was a diary belonging to Marie, Dan's first wife. I knew I shouldn't read it, but something compelled me to do so. As I began to read, tears started streaming down my face. Marie's words painted a picture of a life not unlike my own: endless work, constant criticism, and a husband who seemed oblivious to her struggles. But as I read on, the entries became darker. "The pain is unbearable," one entry read. "I begged Dan to take me to a doctor, but he says we can't afford it. His parents say I'm just being weak. But I know something is wrong. I can feel it." My hands shook as I turned the pages. The final entry made my blood run cold. "I can't take it anymore. The pain, the work, the loneliness. They won't let me get help, won't even buy me medicine, because it's an unnecessary expense. I'm sorry, my sweet boys, but I can't go on like this. Dan, your parents, this is on you. I hope you can live with what you've done." I closed the diary, feeling sick to my stomach. This wasn't just a diary, it was a suicide note. Marie hadn't died from an illness as I'd been told. She had taken her own life, driven to desperation by the very people I was now living with. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. The way Dan and his parents treated me, their callousness towards my health and well-being, it wasn't new. They had done this before, and it had cost a woman her life. I carefully hid the diary in my room, my mind racing. I couldn't let history repeat itself. I couldn't become another Marie. 2 months had passed since I gave birth to my daughter, Emily. The joy of motherhood was overshadowed by the relentless demands of farm life. Night and day blurred together as I struggled to care for a newborn while still tending to Jack and Tommy, cooking meals, cleaning the house, and managing the endless chores that came with the animals. One afternoon, as I was hanging laundry outside, I heard raised voices coming from the barn. Curiosity and concern propelled me forward, and I crept closer to listen. "You killed her," Jack's young voice cracked with emotion. "You and Grandma and Grandpa, you killed Mom." The sharp sound of a slap echoed through the air, followed by Dan's furious voice. "Don't you dare say that again, boy. You think you're so smart, huh? Well, if you're too smart for your own good, maybe you don't need school anymore." My heart raced as I listened, frozen in place. Dan continued his tirade, his voice growing louder. "From now on, you'll work on the farm full-time. You'll earn your keep like the rest of us. You don't need an education to work here. You'll learn what really matters, how to put food on the table." I felt sick to my stomach. Jack was only 9 years old. The thought of him being denied an education, forced to work full-time on the farm, it was unthinkable. The next morning, Dan announced he was leaving for a 3-day farm produce fair with his parents. As soon as their truck disappeared down the driveway, I sprang into action. "Jack, Tommy," I called, my voice surprisingly steady. "Pack a bag with your favorite things. We're going on a trip." As the boys scrambled to pack, I gathered Emily's essentials and a few of our belongings. I retrieved Marie's diary from its hiding place and tucked it safely into my bag. Within an hour, we were in my old car, driving away from the farm. The boys were quiet, sensing the gravity of the situation. Emily slept peacefully in her car seat, oblivious to the turmoil around her. Using my meager savings, I rented a small apartment in the city. It was cramped and nothing like the farmhouse, but it was ours, and it was safe. The next day, I reached out to my old contacts at the archive. They were surprised to hear from me, but eager to help. With their assistance, I managed to track down information about Marie's parents. My hand shook as I dialed the number. A warm, elderly voice answered. "Hello? Mrs. Johnson? This is Hannah. I was married to your son-in-law, Dan." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Is everything all right? We've been trying to get in touch with the boys for years. Dan cut us off after Marie, after we lost her. Please, can we see them? It turned out the Johnsons lived in a neighboring town. They invited us to visit, eager to reunite with their grandchildren and meet Emily. The moment we arrived at the Johnsons' house, I felt a wave of warmth and acceptance wash over us. Marie's parents, Ellen and Robert, greeted us with open arms and tear-filled eyes. "Oh, look at you all," Ellen exclaimed, hugging Jack and Tommy tightly. "You've grown so much." Robert gently took Emily from my arms, cradling her with the practiced ease of a grandfather. "And this little one, she's beautiful, Hannah." Once we were settled inside, I knew it was time. With shaking hands, I pulled Marie's diary from my bag. "There's something you need to see," I said softly, holding out the diary to Ellen. As they read, their expressions changed from curiosity to horror to grief. Tears streamed down Ellen's face, while Robert's jaw clenched in anger. "We knew something was wrong," Ellen whispered. "But we never imagined, oh, Marie." Just then, my phone rang. It was Dan. I steeled myself and answered. "Where the hell are you?" he growled. "Get back home now, or I'm calling the police." I felt a surge of courage. "No, Dan. I'm not coming back. In fact, I'll be the one contacting the police. Don't call me again." I hung up, my heart racing. Over the next few days, with the Johnsons' support, I set our plan in motion. I contacted Child Protective Services, providing detailed accounts of the abuse and neglect the children had suffered. Then, clutching Marie's diary, I walked into the local police station. The detective listened gravely as I recounted everything: the forced labor, the medical neglect, Marie's suicide. "This is extremely serious," the detective said. "We'll need to investigate thoroughly. Are you willing to press charges?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "For all of us." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Dan and his parents were arrested and brought in for questioning. The farm was searched, and more evidence of abuse was uncovered. The boys were interviewed by child psychologists, bravely recounting their experiences. It was heart-wrenching to hear their stories, but I was so proud of their courage. Finally, after months of legal proceedings, we found ourselves in the courtroom for the final verdict. I sat between Ellen and Robert, holding Emily close, with Jack and Tommy on either side of us. The judge's voice rang out clearly. "In light of the overwhelming evidence, this court finds the defendants guilty of child abuse, neglect, labor exploitation, and criminally negligent homicide in the death of Marie Johnson." I heard Ellen's sharp intake of breath beside me. The judge continued, "Daniel Miller is sentenced to 10 years in prison. His parents, Martha and George Miller, are each sentenced to 7 years." As the gavel came down, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, vindication, sadness, and hope. I looked at the boys, seeing a weight lift from their young shoulders. In the aftermath of the trial, our lives began to take on a new shape. Marie's parents were godsends. They opened their home to us, providing a safe haven as we navigated the choppy waters of our new reality. "Your family now, Hannah," Ellen said one evening, as we sat on their porch watching the kids play in the yard. "We're here for you, whatever you need." Their support was unwavering. They helped with childcare during the seemingly endless court proceedings and meetings with lawyers. Robert would often take Jack and Tommy fishing, giving them a chance to just be kids again. Ellen doted on baby Emily, singing her the same lullabies she once sang to Marie. With their encouragement, I hired a skilled divorce lawyer. The Johnsons insisted on covering the legal fees. The divorce proceedings were mercifully straightforward, given Dan's incarceration. When it was finalized, I was awarded full custody of all 3 children and substantial compensation from Dan's assets. As much as I appreciated the Johnsons' hospitality, I knew it was time for us to stand on our own feet. Using part of the settlement money, I rented a comfortable apartment in the city, close to my old workplace and a well-regarded school. The day I walked back into the National Archives felt like coming home. My colleagues welcomed me with open arms, and my boss was more than accommodating about my need for a flexible schedule. Enrolling the kids in school was a bittersweet moment. Jack and Tommy were excited but nervous, having been out of formal education for so long. Emily started at a nearby daycare. I'll never forget the lump in my throat as I watched them all head off that first morning, their backpacks seeming too big for their small shoulders. Ellen and Robert were frequent visitors, their presence a constant reminder that we weren't alone. They doted on all three children equally, showering them with the grandparental love they'd been denied for so long. One Sunday afternoon, as we all sat around the living room after a big family lunch, Robert cleared his throat. "Hannah, Ellen and I have been talking," he began, looking slightly nervous. "We've updated our will. We want you and the kids to be taken care of, no matter what happens." I was stunned. "But I'm not." Ellen reached out and squeezed my hand. "You're our daughter now, Hannah. And those are our grandchildren. We want to make it official." Tears welled up in my eyes as the magnitude of their gesture hit me. This was what family was supposed to be, unconditional love and support. As I looked around the room at the faces of my children and these two wonderful people who had embraced us so completely, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I'm Lydia, and I've lived a life that's straight out of a storybook, minus the fancy trimmings. I was a teacher for most of my years, shaping minds and wiping noses. Life took a sharp turn when I lost my husband, Tom, in a car crash. Our son, Michael, was just 7 then, and he became my whole world. When my folks passed, they left me a bit of money. I used it to pay off debts and bought a snug little house in the suburbs. It was just me and Michael against the world, and that was enough for us. Now Michael, he grew up smart and kind, every mother's dream. He got himself through college studying computers and landed a decent job right out of school. What's more, he chose to stick around at home. I never minded, the house felt fuller with him in it. Things took an unexpected turn when Michael met Jessica. She was a sharp one, tall, with a head full of curls and a smile that seemed to know more than it let on. I wanted to like her, I truly did. But something about her just didn't sit right with me. The day he brought her home to meet me, she was all sweet talk and compliments. "Mrs. Connor, your home is absolutely lovely, so warm and welcoming," she exclaimed as she toured the living room. "Thanks, dear. We like it cozy around here," I replied, trying to make her feel at home despite my reservations. Over dinner, their news dropped like a lead balloon. "Mom, we've been thinking about the future a lot lately, and, well, we're getting married," Michael announced, his eyes bright. I nearly choked on my water. "Married? That's wonderful." I managed, my voice a bit too high. Jessica beamed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We want to do it soon, just a small thing, you know? Nothing fancy," she added quickly, as if to cushion the blow. I nodded, plastering on a smile. "Of course, whatever makes you two happy." But as the wedding plans rolled on, and Jessica's true colors started showing when she thought I wasn't looking, I caught snippets of phone conversations, bits of her saying not so nice things about me. I kept my cool, never let on that I knew. I just made a mental note, "Watch your back, Lydia. This girl's not what she seems." The wedding came and went in a blur of flowers and pastel dresses. I stood by, the proud mother with a smile nailed on, while inside, I was all knots and nerves. Watching them dance, watching her hold him close, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing my son to a stranger. After Michael and Jessica's wedding, life got a whole lot more complicated. The young couple decided not to move out, but instead set up shop right under my roof. The house I'd so lovingly curated for decades suddenly seemed to shrink, its walls closing in as Jessica's presence loomed larger and larger. The first few weeks were a buzz of activity, thank you notes to write, wedding gifts to sort through, and endless discussions about their future. But as the dust settled, a new pattern emerged. Jessica, now officially the lady of the house in her mind, took to managing everything, including where I should sit and what I should eat. One evening, while Michael was at work, I found Jessica rearranging the living room. "Jessica, what are you doing?" I had everything just right? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Just thought I'd freshen up the place a bit, she snapped, her voice sharp like a kitchen knife. It's good to change things up now and again, don't you think? I didn't agree. Look, I appreciate you trying to help, but please, leave things the way I set them. Michael likes it that way. She scoffed, a sound that grated on my nerves. Well, things change, Lydia. Maybe it's time you start getting used to that. Then came the pregnancy announcement. I should have been overjoyed, and part of me was, but the news also brought new tensions. Jessica, now more than ever, made herself the center of everything. Lydia, I'm really not feeling up to cooking tonight, could you handle dinner? She'd ask, almost daily, as she lounged on the couch, flipping through magazines. I'd nod and head to the kitchen, biting back my frustration. One afternoon, I tried to broach the subject. Jessica, dear, I know you're tired with the baby coming and all, but maybe you could help with the salads or setting the table? She looked at me as if I'd suggested she climb Mount Everest. Really, Lydia? I'm carrying a child here. You expect me to stand and chop vegetables? Before I could respond, Michael walked in, home early from work. Jessica turned to him immediately, her tone shifting. Baby, tell your mom I'm not supposed to strain myself. Doctor's orders, remember? Michael, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over. Mom, Jess really needs to take it easy. Maybe we can all pitch in a bit more, huh? As the weeks turned into months, my home life revolved around Jessica's needs and whims. I felt more like a housekeeper than a family member. One particularly tough day, after scrubbing the kitchen clean while Jessica ordered takeout, I finally let off some steam to Susan, my next-door neighbor and longtime confidant. Lydia, why do you put up with that girl? Susan asked as we sipped coffee in her kitchen. I shrugged, a heavy sigh escaping my lips. What choice do I have? It's Michael's wife. I can't just kick them out. Susan shook her head, her eyes fierce. You need to stand up for yourself, Lydia. This is your house, your rules. Don't let that little tyrant push you around. Her words struck a chord, and as I walked back home, I realized she was right. I needed to reclaim my space, my authority. I was the one who built this life, not Jessica. But figuring out how to do that without losing my son was a puzzle I wasn't sure how to solve. Life in our house grew more complicated with the arrival of Michael and Jessica's twins. At first, the joy of being a grandmother was overwhelming, in a good way. Those tiny hands, the late-night coos, and even the cries were music to my ears. But as the twins grew, so did the demands on my time and energy. Days blurred into nights as I juggled childcare with my job and household chores. Jessica, meanwhile, seemed to take her role as the mother a bit too leisurely, preferring to spend her days lounging or shopping. Cooking was a foreign concept to her, and I found myself handling every meal, on top of cleaning up after everyone. One exhausting evening, I was knee-deep in laundry when Michael came home. Spotting him in the hallway, I couldn't hold back any longer. Michael, we need to talk, I started, the fatigue evident in my voice. He looked concerned but wary. What's wrong, Mom? It's all too much. I love those babies, but I'm not as young as I used to be. I thought Jessica would take on more by now. Before Michael could reply, Jessica entered the room, her arms laden with shopping bags. What's all this about, Lydia? Why are you upsetting Michael? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Jessica, I just think it's time you started helping out more around here. Maybe even cook a meal once in a while. Jessica's face twisted into a scowl. Are you saying I'm a bad mother? How dare you? The room grew tense, the air thick with unspoken grievances. I think it might be better if you find your own place, I finally said, the words heavy on my tongue but necessary. Jessica took my words like a slap. So you want to kick us out? Your own grandkids? No, Jessica, that's not what I meant. I just think it might be easier on all of us if you had your space, and I had mine. The conversation ended with no resolution, just a lot of hurt feelings. Jessica stormed off to their room, and Michael followed after a moment, leaving me alone in the silent aftermath. Feeling isolated in my own home, I confided in Susan the next day over a cup of tea. "I just don't know what to do anymore. I'm at my wit's end," I confessed, the steam from the tea fogging up my glasses. Susan was always full of fiery advice. "Lydia, you've got to put your foot down. It's your house, your rules. Maybe it's time they learn that." Her suggestion of eviction seemed extreme, but as I mulled it over, it didn't seem entirely unreasonable. "I just don't want to lose my son, or my grandkids," I admitted, the fear of making a permanent rift a constant shadow. "Sometimes, tough love is the only way," Susan said firmly. "But whatever you decide, I'm here for you." Years had flown by, each more draining than the last. I'd hoped things might change as the twins got older, but Jessica never took up the reins as a mother should. She didn't work, claiming the kids needed her at home, though it seemed they needed anyone but her given how little she actually did around the house. On the morning of my 58th birthday, I woke early, stirred by a mix of anticipation and loneliness. I baked a cake, chocolate, everyone's favorite. I decorated it with the simple tools I had, thinking of the small pleasures that used to light up Michael's face when he was a boy. By the time the afternoon rolled in, the cake sat on the counter, its sweet aroma filling the kitchen. I waited, listening for the sounds of the car pulling up, the kids' laughter spilling in as they returned from kindergarten. But the door that eventually opened brought in no joyful noise, just Michael and Jessica, their faces strangely tense. "Where are the kids?" I asked, a frown knitting my brow. Michael looked away, and Jessica, ever so blunt, answered, "They're at my mom's. We thought we'd take the weekend off. Just the two of us." Jessica poured herself and Michael a glass of wine without acknowledging my offer. They clinked glasses right there in the kitchen, a silent toast to their getaway. Then, Jessica turned to me, her voice cold as ice. "Lydia, would you mind keeping it down this weekend? We really need some quiet." Stunned, I stood there, holding the cake knife, feeling like a stranger in my own home. "This is my house," I said, the words heavier than I intended. "And it's my birthday." Jessica scoffed, her voice sharp. "Look, Lydia, just stay in your room and keep out of our way. We want to enjoy our weekend." Michael didn't meet my eyes. "Mom, please, just this once." The pain of his betrayal was sharper than any knife I'd ever held. "Your once is every time, Michael," I whispered, my voice cracking. They didn't listen. Instead, Jessica walked up to me, took my arm, and led me to the door. "You know, we're already tired of you whining. You should take a walk, clear your head," she said, as she pushed me out into the cold, rainy evening. Dressed only in my house clothes, with nowhere to go, I walked the streets, my tears mingling with the rain. Finally, I found myself on Susan's porch, shivering and miserable. She opened the door, her expression turning from surprise to anger as she saw my state. "Lydia, what on earth? Come in, you're soaking wet." As I sat in her warm kitchen, wrapped in a dry blanket, I poured out the whole sorry tale. Susan's face grew darker with each word. "This is the last straw, Lydia," she said firmly. "You can't let them treat you like this. It's your house, your life. You've got to fight back." Her conviction was a lifeline thrown into the turbulent waters of my despair. "But how, Susan? He's my son. I don't want to lose him." "You've already lost him if he can treat you this way. Let's call my brother, the lawyer. We'll see what your options are." I nodded, feeling the first stir of resolve. Susan made the call, and her brother agreed to meet me the next day. Sitting in her cozy living room, I realized I was afraid to go back to my own home. A place where I was unwelcome on my own birthday no less. I trudged back home late that night, heart heavy and clothes still damp. The house was silent, the only sign of life being the clutter of dirty dishes and half-empty wine glasses scattered around the living room. I didn't bother cleaning up, I was too spent, both emotionally and physically. Instead, I went straight to my room, locking the door behind me. As dawn broke, I lay in bed, the events of the previous day replaying in my mind. I quietly got up, gathered my essentials, phone, house documents, and a bit of courage tucked into my purse, and slipped out to meet Susan's brother, the lawyer. The morning was crisp, and as I walked to the lawyer's office, the cool air felt like a balm. Susan's brother greeted me warmly, his office a stark contrast to the chaos of my home. "Lydia, let's sit down and talk this through," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. I took a deep breath, and as I told him everything, his expression grew serious. "It sounds like you've been through quite an ordeal. You have rights, especially in your own home." "What can I do? I don't want to live like this anymore," I confessed, feeling a mix of hope and fear. "Well, we could start by looking into Jessica's past. There might be something there. And, if you're serious about this, we can file for an eviction notice. It's your house, after all," he advised, his tone professional yet empathetic. The thought of evicting my own son and his family was heart-wrenching, but the lawyer's words rang true. It was indeed my house, and I deserved peace. "I'll do it. It's time I stood up for myself," I declared, the decision firming up with every word spoken aloud. The lawyer nodded, drafting the documents as we spoke. He moved quickly, and before long, he had filed a petition in court to evict Michael and Jessica. The court process was brisk, and to my relief and simultaneous heartbreak, the judge sided with me. My claim was justified, I was granted the eviction. The day they moved out was one of the most painful days of my life. Jessica was livid, hurling curses and threats as she packed. "You'll regret this, Lydia. You've not seen the last of me," she spat, her eyes wild with fury. "Michael, my own son, wouldn't even look at me." His parting words cut deeper than any knife. "You've crossed all boundaries, Mom. I never thought you'd actually go through with this." The weeks after Michael and Jessica moved out were quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you think too much, wonder too much. But then, one ordinary Tuesday, a phone call shattered that silence and sent ripples through the rest of my life. The caller was the private detective I had hired at my lawyer's suggestion. I remember fumbling with the phone, my hands shaking slightly as I answered. "Mrs. Connor, I found something you need to see." The detective's voice was grave, urgent. "What is it? What did you find?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I think you better sit down for this," he replied. I perched on the edge of my armchair, clutching the phone tighter. "I'm listening." The investigation into Jessica's past turned up more than we bargained for. She was not only a known fraud but is also suspected in the death of her first husband. The police couldn't prove anything at the time, and she walked free. My breath caught in my throat. And? There's more. She had a child with her first husband, a boy. She abandoned him right after her husband's death. And regarding her husband's fatal car accident, we found new evidence. It appears she might have been directly involved. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of involvement? She tampered with his car. We tracked down the mechanic who worked on the brakes. He's been carrying this guilt for years, and now, he's ready to confess. He claims Jessica paid him to tamper with the brakes. I sat stunned, unable to speak for a long moment. This is monstrous. My son and grandchildren. I need to go to the police. They need to know all this. That's the right step, Mrs. Connor. I'll send over all the evidence we've collected. Hanging up, I felt a storm brewing inside me. With the dossier of evidence in hand, I went straight to the police station. The officers were initially skeptical, but as they sifted through the documents and listened to my account, their skepticism turned to concern. "We'll need to take immediate action based on this new evidence," one of the detectives said, his expression grim. Days later, I watched, heart in mouth, as the police arrested Jessica. The scene played out on the evening news, cameras flashing as she was led away in handcuffs. Her face was a mask of fury and disbelief. Back home, Susan sat beside me, her hand gripping mine. You did the right thing, Lydia. It had to be done. On the screen, reporters buzzed around the police, speculating, questioning. I felt a mix of relief and sorrow, relief that the truth was out, sorrow for what it meant for my son. Michael, poor Michael. He had been duped, dragged into a nightmare, by a woman he loved. How could she have hidden all this? How could I not have seen? I murmured, more to myself than to Susan. Sometimes, we see only what we want to, Susan replied softly. But you possibly saved more lives, Lydia. Remember that. After Jessica's arrest, Michael took on the full responsibility of caring for the twins. He was drowning in legal fees, desperate to prove Jessica's innocence. It wasn't long before he came knocking on my door, the son I'd raised alone, now a weary, desperate man. He looked exhausted, eyes hollow, when he asked, "Mom, I need to borrow some money for Jessica's bail. The lawyers are bleeding me dry, but I can't let her rot in jail." My heart ached seeing him like this, but the sting of his recent harshness was still fresh. "Michael, I can't. After everything that's come out. I just can't support that." His face hardened, the hurt in his eyes turning to anger. "You never liked her. Now you see your chance and you just let her suffer, huh? What kind of mother are you? Michael, you don't understand. I'm doing this to protect you, to protect the kids," I pleaded, my voice trembling with emotion. "Protect us? By tearing us apart?" He scoffed bitterly, shaking his head. "You've ruined everything, Mom. You think you're helping, but you're just making it all worse." With that, he stormed off, curses muttered under his breath echoing around the silent house. The situation took a darker turn when one of Jessica's old friends turned up at the police station, her face pale, her hands trembling. The detectives called me in when she started talking. I never thought she'd actually do it, but Jessica planned it all, the woman confessed, her voice a haunted whisper. "She wanted to get rid of you, Lydia. She talked about making it look like an accident, pushing you down the stairs when you were alone." My blood ran cold. The room spun slightly as her words sunk in. She wanted to kill me? Yes, and not just you. After you were gone, she planned to do the same to Michael. She wanted everything, the house, the money, everything you both owned. The detectives assured me they were taking it seriously, but the revelation shook me to my core. As I left the station, the world seemed a different place, darker, more dangerous. Back home, Susan was waiting, her expression grim. "I heard what happened. That woman is a monster, Lydia. You know that now, right?" "I do, but Michael doesn't. He still thinks I'm the enemy." I sighed, the weight of my son's estrangement heavy on my heart. "Give him time. He's got to see the truth for himself. And he will. He has to," Susan said firmly, squeezing my hand in solidarity. As I lay in bed that night, the silence of the house was no longer comforting, but a reminder of the family I once had. The betrayal, the danger I had unknowingly lived with. I shuddered at the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't acted, if I had let my doubts and Michael's displeasure sway my resolve. When Michael finally saw the horrific truth, he halted all legal support and refused to post bail for her. He filed for divorce and moved to strip Jessica of her parental rights. One rainy afternoon, not long after these events, Michael came to my door. His eyes were weary, his shoulders slumped, an image of defeat and remorse. "Mom, can I come in?" His voice was low, hesitant. I nodded, stepping aside to let him into the house. It felt strange having him there, in the space that had been a battleground for so long. "Mom, I'm here to apologize. For everything. I was blinded, and I didn't listen to you. I'm so sorry." I listened, the words I had longed to hear now stirring a tumult of emotions within me. "Michael, you believed in her, protected her, even when she was destroying our family. How do you think that felt for me? I know it was wrong. I can't even begin to understand how much I hurt you," he replied, his voice cracking with the burden of his guilt. "And the children? I pressed, needing to know they were safe. They're with me now. They're safe, I promise. Jessica, she won't be able to hurt them anymore, he assured me, determination stealing his features. I nodded, the information settling some of my fears. And what do you want from me, Michael? He swallowed hard, looking down at his hands before meeting my gaze again. I hope that we can start to rebuild. I miss you, Mom. And the kids miss their grandma. I took a moment, the decision heavy on my heart. I want to see the grandchildren. They shouldn't suffer because of all this. But you, Michael. I'm not sure I can forgive you. In the days that followed, I spent more time with my grandchildren, cherishing their laughter and the joy they brought to the quiet house. Their innocence was a balm to my worn soul, and I was determined to raise them differently, to instill values that perhaps I had failed to fully instill in Michael. Susan, ever my rock, stood by me through it all. You're doing the right thing, Lydia, she would say during our long talks over coffee. You're strong, and now you're free to live your life on your terms. She was right. I had learned a hard lesson about the dangers of losing oneself in the care of others, of ignoring one's own needs and rights. Now, I was rediscovering who I was beyond being a mother and a grandmother. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I was grateful. Grateful for the truth, no matter how painful it had been, and for the chance to start anew. Life was different now, richer and more mine than it had been in years. I was moving forward, one sure step at a time, on a path that was entirely my own.